The sun has not yet broken the eastern horizon when the first pale light begins to touch the tops of the great stone monuments. In this liminal hour, when night still pools in the valleys and dawn hesitates at the edge of the world, Monument Valley exists in a state of profound stillness. The air is cool, almost cold, carrying with it the scent of sage and ancient dust. This is the breathing space between darkness and light, the moment when the land seems to hold its breath, waiting. High above, the last stars fade into the deepening blue of morning. The Milky Way, which only hours before stretched across the sky like a river of light, now dissolves into the coming day. And then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the transformation begins. The uppermost reaches of the great stone towers begin to glow, not with reflected light, not yet, but with something that seems to come from within the stone itself, a subtle warming, a hint of rose and amber that spreads like watercolor across the massive faces of sandstone. This is how Monument Valley has greeted the morning for millennia beyond counting. This is how it will greet tomorrow's dawn, and all the tomorrows stretching into a future as vast as the geological past that created these magnificent forms. The monuments themselves, these impossible towers of layered stone, these buttresses and pillars and walls that rise from the desert floor, stand as they have always stood, patient and eternal, witnesses to the turning of ages. The East Mitten Butte catches the first full rays of sunlight, its massive thumb, a vertical spire of stone jutting from the main body of the butte, seems to ignite. The light spreads across its face, revealing every subtle variation in the stone's coloring, every band and layer that speaks of ancient seas and river deltas, of deserts long vanished and mountains ground to sand. The stone is not one color, but a symphony of hues, deep reds like dried blood, oranges that glow like embers, purples that hint at shadow even in full light, and here and there, bands of cream and white where different minerals tell different stories. Beside it, the West Mitten Butte awakens in turn, and beyond that, Merrick Butte, standing like a sentinel at the gate of the valley. The light moves across the landscape with stately slowness, illuminating each formation in turn, bringing warmth and color to stone that has known the touch of countless dawns. Down on the valley floor, the sand begins to shift from gray to gold, and the sparse vegetation, rabbit brush and sage, juniper twisted by wind and time, emerges from shadow into definition. There is a quality to this light that exists nowhere else on Earth. Perhaps it is the clarity of the desert air scoured clean by wind and unmarred by moisture. Perhaps it is the way the light must travel across such vast distances of emptiness before striking stone. Or perhaps it is something in the stone itself, in the iron oxides that give the sandstone its remarkable colors, minerals that catch and hold light in ways that seem almost luminous. Whatever the source, the effect is undeniable. Monument Valley in the early morning light appears painted by a divine hand, each monument a masterwork of color and shadow, form and void. As the sun climbs higher, the character of the valley shifts. The long shadows that stretched across the desert floor begin to shorten. The deep contrast between light and dark softens into a more even illumination. Details invisible in the dramatic side lighting of dawn become visible. The vertical striations in the stone walls become apparent, like the strings of some enormous harp. The talus slopes at the base of each monument, piles of broken stone that have fallen from the heights over countless centuries, reveal their own textures and colors. But even as the sun rises, Even as the day gathers its strength, there remains something timeless about this place, something that exists outside the ordinary flow of hours and minutes. Standing here, surrounded by these monuments, a person cannot help but feel the weight of deep time, the vast stretches of years that separate this moment from the moment when these stones were first laid down, grain by grain, in the bed of an ancient sea. The valley floor stretches away in all directions, interrupted by the monuments that give this place its name and character. They rise not as part of a range or a ridge, but as isolated towers and walls, separated from each other by vast spaces of open desert. This isolation is part of what makes them so striking, so memorable. Each formation stands alone, defined by the emptiness around it, a sculpture set in a gallery of earth and sky. To walk across the valley floor is to understand scale in a new way. What appears from a distance to be a short walk reveals itself to be a journey of miles. The monuments that seem to loom overhead are actually separated from the viewer by expanses of desert that swallow sound and distance. The human figure standing in this landscape becomes insignificant, a tiny point of movement in a vastness that has no need of human presence, no acknowledgement of human time. Yet this place is not empty. It has never been empty. For thousands of years, people have lived in the shadow of these monuments, have drawn water from the springs that seep from the stone, have planted corn in the sandy soil and grazed sheep on the sparse grasses. The Navajo people call this place Tsé Biiʼ Ndzisgaii, the valley within the rocks. They have walked these paths, have traced the curves of these canyon walls, have watched these same sunrises and sunsets, have told stories beneath these same stars. The land and the people are woven together, threads in a tapestry that stretches back through time. But to understand how this place came to be, to comprehend the forces that created these impossible towers of stone, requires reaching back through time not in thousands of years, but in millions, back to ages when the earth itself wore a different face.
270 million years ago, long before the age of dinosaurs, long before mammals walked the earth, long before the first bird spread its wings, this land lay beneath a shallow sea. The Permian period was drawing to a close, and what would one day be the American Southwest existed at a latitude far different from where it lies today. The tectonic plates that carry the continents were arranged differently. The climate was different. The very composition of the atmosphere was different. The sea that covered this region was not deep. Sunlight penetrated to its sandy bottom, encouraging the growth of algae and supporting a diverse community of marine life. Trilobites, those ancient arthropods that would soon vanish from the earth forever, scuttled across the seafloor. Primitive fish swam in the waters above. Coral reefs grew in the shallows, and constantly, endlessly, the sea deposited sediment. Rivers flowing from ancient highlands carried sand and silt into this inland sea. The currents sorted the particles by size and weight, laying them down in horizontal beds across the seafloor. Season after season, year after year, millennium after millennium, the sediment accumulated. A grain of sand settling here, a particle of silt drifting there, each individual contribution infinitesimal, but the collective result profound. The sand was primarily quartz, one of the most durable minerals on Earth, resistant to weathering and chemical breakdown. But mixed with it were other minerals, feldspar, mica, tiny particles of iron oxide. These would later give the stone its characteristic colors, but for now they were simply part of the accumulating mass, buried beneath the weight of subsequent layers. As more and more sediment piled up, the lower layers began to compact under the immense pressure. Water was squeezed out from between the grains. The individual particles were pressed closer and closer together. And then, through a process that occurred over millions of years, the loose sediment began to transform into solid stone. Minerals dissolved in groundwater percolated through the sediment, depositing cementing agents that bound the sand grains together. Calcite and silica filled the tiny spaces between particles, creating a matrix of mineral cement that held everything in place. This process, called lithification, turned loose sand into sandstone, transformed the soft sediment of the seafloor into rock solid enough to last for hundreds of millions of years. The layers that formed during this time, the Diné sandstone and the Organ Rock shale, would eventually become the caprock and foundation of the monuments themselves. But the formation of the stone was only the beginning of the story. The seas did not remain forever. The Earth's crust is never still, never truly at rest. Tectonic forces push and pull continents, raise mountains, and open ocean basins. As the Permian period ended and the Triassic began, the seas that had covered this region began to retreat. The land rose, or perhaps the sea level fell. In the vast scales of geological time, the distinction becomes academic. What matters is that the seafloor became dry land. And once exposed to air, the newly formed rock began to experience entirely different forces. Wind scoured its surface. Rain fell on it, seeping into tiny cracks and crevices. During cold periods, water in these cracks froze and expanded, wedging the cracks wider. During hot periods, the rock expanded and contracted with the temperature changes, creating stress and fracture. For millions of years, the land lay relatively flat, a vast expanse of layered sedimentary rock. But approximately 70 million years ago, during the Laramide orogeny, the mountain-building period that created the Rocky Mountains, the entire region was uplifted. The Colorado Plateau, a vast area encompassing parts of Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, rose as a more or less intact block, lifted thousands of feet above sea level, without the intense folding and fracturing that characterized mountain building in other regions. This uplift changed everything. Streams that had flowed lazily across a nearly level plain suddenly found themselves with increased gradients, increased velocity, increased erosive power. They began to cut downward into the rock with renewed vigor. The Colorado River, which drains much of this region, began the long process of carving the Grand Canyon. And countless smaller streams and washes began their own work of erosion, cutting channels, removing material, exposing the layers of ancient stone. In the region that would become Monument Valley, the erosion took a particular form. The layers of rock that made up the plateau were not uniform in their resistance to weathering. The Diné sandstone, the layer that would eventually form the monuments themselves, was relatively hard and resistant, but the layers beneath it, particularly the Organ Rock shale, were softer, more easily eroded. As water carved into the plateau, it exploited the differences between these layers. It cut down through the harder caprock relatively slowly, but once it reached the softer shale beneath, erosion accelerated. The shale was undermined and washed away, leaving the harder sandstone above unsupported. Massive blocks of sandstone collapsed and were carried away by floods. The process continued, widening valleys, isolating blocks of stone, creating the distinctive landscape visible today. But erosion is not random. Water follows the path of least resistance, exploiting existing fractures and weaknesses in the rock. And the Diné sandstone, like most sedimentary rocks, was laced with vertical fractures called joints. These joints, formed by various tectonic stresses and by the expansion and contraction of the rock, created planes of weakness running through the stone. Where joints intersected, where fractures crossed each other, erosion could work more quickly. Water could penetrate deeper, freeze and thaw more effectively, undermine the stone more efficiently. Over time, the landscape became a pattern of intersecting fractures, with blocks of resistant sandstone standing where the fracturing was minimal and deep washes cutting through where the joints provided pathways for erosion. The result is the Monument Valley we see today, a landscape of isolated buttes and mesas, of vertical cliffs and talus slopes, of towers and walls rising from a broad valley floor. Each monument represents a block of stone that has, so far, resisted complete erosion. Each is surrounded by the evidence of what has been removed, the tons and cubic miles of rock that once filled the valleys between them, now carried away by water and scattered across the desert as sand. The process continues even now. Every rainstorm contributes to the erosion. Every freeze-thaw cycle loosens more grains of sand from the monument's faces. Every windstorm carries away the finest particles, polishing the stone, shaping it grain by grain. The wind is the valley's constant companion. It rises with the sun, gathering strength as the day warms, flowing across the desert floor like an invisible river. The wind has been carving this landscape for millions of years, working in partnership with water, each agent of erosion contributing its particular talents to the sculpture of stone. Wind erosion operates differently than water erosion. Water cuts downward, following gravity, carving channels and valleys. Wind moves horizontally, sandblasting exposed surfaces, polishing stone, creating smooth curves and flowing forms. The wind picks up sand grains and hurls them against the rock faces. Each impact is infinitesimal, removing perhaps a single grain from the surface. But multiply that single grain by billions, by trillions, and multiply those impacts by millions of years, and the result is profound. The monuments bear the marks of wind erosion on every surface. Their bases, where the wind-driven sand is most concentrated, are often undercut, carved into flowing organic shapes. Higher up, where the wind sandblasting is less effective but still present, the rock faces show a different texture, smoother, more polished, the individual grains worn down to create surfaces that catch and reflect light.
But the wind does more than simply wear away the stone. It also selects which stone remains and which is removed. The Diné sandstone is not uniform in its composition. Some layers are more heavily cemented, harder, more resistant to erosion. Other layers are softer, more friable, easier for the wind to attack. As the wind works on the monument faces, it preferentially removes the softer layers, leaving the harder layers to project slightly, creating the horizontal banding that is so characteristic of these formations. This differential erosion, as geologists call it, is responsible for much of the detail visible in the monuments. The subtle variations in the stone's hardness, variations that might be measured in tiny fractions of resistance to erosion, become over geological time profound differences in the resulting topography. A layer that is only slightly harder than its neighbors might project inches or even feet from the monument face. A layer that is slightly softer might be deeply undercut, creating an overhang or a sheltered alcove. Water, when it comes, works more dramatically but less frequently. In this desert environment, rain is a rare and precious commodity. Months might pass between significant precipitation events, but when the rains do come, they often arrive with violence. Summer monsoons build towering thunderheads that release their moisture in concentrated downpours. Winter storms can bring steady rain or even snow that melts rapidly when the sun returns. The desert soil, baked hard by the sun and lacking the organic matter that would help it absorb moisture, cannot accommodate these sudden influxes of water. The rain runs off almost immediately, gathering in washes and gullies, converging into larger and larger streams until flash floods roar through the valley, carrying enormous loads of sediment. These floods, though brief, are incredibly powerful agents of erosion. They undercut the bases of the monuments, removing the softer shale layers, causing blocks of the harder caprock to collapse. They carve deeper channels in the valley floor, transport boulders the size of automobiles, and redistribute sediment across the landscape.
A single major flood event might accomplish more erosion than years of wind action. But water also contributes to erosion in slower, more subtle ways. Rain seeping into the porous sandstone dissolves some of the mineral cement that holds the sand grains together, weakening the stone from within. Water collecting in small depressions on horizontal surfaces slowly dissolves the rock, creating deeper and deeper pockets called potholes. These potholes can eventually grow large enough to weaken the entire structure, leading to rockfalls and collapses. Freeze-thaw cycles are particularly effective at breaking up rock. Water that seeps into cracks and fissures during the day freezes at night or during winter cold snaps. Water expands when it freezes, and this expansion exerts tremendous force on the surrounding rock. Over many cycles, this force widens cracks, breaks off flakes of stone, and eventually splits even massive blocks of sandstone. The combination of these erosional forces, wind, water, freeze-thaw, dissolution, working over millions of years, has created the landscape we see today. But that landscape is not random. The monuments have particular forms because the forces acting on them are not random. The vertical joints in the sandstone determine where erosion can cut most deeply. The horizontal layering determines how the monument faces will be sculpted. The relative hardness of different layers determines which will project and which will recede. The result is a landscape of extraordinary beauty and remarkable consistency. The monuments, despite being separated from each other by hundreds of feet or even miles, share common characteristics. They have vertical or near-vertical walls, a result of the vertical jointing in the sandstone. They have horizontal banding, a result of the layered deposition of the original sediment. They have talus slopes at their bases, piles of broken rock that have fallen from above and accumulated over time. Yet, within this consistency, there is infinite variation. No two monuments are exactly alike. Each has its own particular shape, its own collection of ledges and overhangs, its own texture and coloration. Some stand alone, isolated towers rising from the valley floor. Others cluster together in groups, separated by narrow spaces. Some are massive, dominating the landscape from miles around. Others are more delicate, slender spires that seem impossibly tall for their width. The East Mitten Butte and West Mitten Butte, perhaps the most iconic formations in Monument Valley, exemplify this combination of similarity and difference. They are clearly related, clearly formed by similar processes acting on similar rock. Both have the characteristic shape that give them their name, a massive main body with a projecting thumb of stone. Both display the horizontal layering of the Diné sandstone. Both stand at approximately the same height, their tops reaching about 6,000 feet above sea level, rising 1,000 feet above the surrounding valley floor. Yet they are not identical. The East Mitten's thumb is more prominent, more dramatically separated from the main body. The West Mitten has a slightly different profile, with variations in its banding that create different patterns of light and shadow. The space between them, the gap through which visitors often photograph them together, is itself a result of erosion, a place where the stone that once connected them has been removed by wind and water. Merrick Butte, standing nearby, shares their height and their basic structure but lacks a thumb, presenting instead a more rounded profile. Together, these three formations create a composition that has become synonymous with Monument Valley, with the American West, with a certain idea of landscape that speaks to something deep in the human psyche, a longing for the vast, the ancient, the enduring. The morning light has fully claimed the valley now, and the great monuments stand revealed in all their glory. The East Mitten Butte and the West Mitten Butte, those iconic formations that have become the symbol of Monument Valley to people around the world, rise before us like ancient sentinels placed by some unimaginable hand to guard the threshold between earth and sky.
From certain vantage points, particularly from the north, the two mittens appear to stand side by side, presenting their most recognizable profiles. The thumb of the east mitten projects toward the viewer, a narrow spire of stone about 400 feet in length, separated from the main body of the butte by a gap of perhaps 50 feet. This thumb creates the distinctive profile that gives the formation its name. It does indeed resemble a mitten, though a mitten designed for a giant, a glove that might fit the hand of a deity. The main body of the butte rises in a series of vertical cliffs, each one set back slightly from the one below, creating a stepped profile. This stepping is a direct result of the differential erosion we have discussed. The harder layers project outward, the softer layers recede. At the top, a relatively flat caprock surface provides a platform where hardy vegetation clings to existence, visible from below as a subtle darkening of the stone. The colors shift constantly as the sun moves across the sky. In the early morning, when the light is cool and slanted, the monuments appear almost red, the iron oxides in the stone responding to the particular wavelengths of dawn light. As the sun climbs higher and the light becomes more neutral, other colors emerge: oranges and browns, creams and tans, even subtle purples and grays in the shadows. By midday, when the sun is directly overhead, the monuments can appear almost washed out, the intense light bleaching away some of the color's intensity. But the monuments are never more beautiful than in the late afternoon and evening, when the light once again becomes directional and warm. Then the reds truly glow, seeming to emanate from within the stone itself. The shadows deepen and become more defined, creating dramatic contrasts between light and dark. The monuments become three-dimensional in a way that the flat light of midday cannot achieve. Every ledge and overhang revealed, every texture emphasized.
The West Mitten stands with its own particular character, different in subtle ways from its companion. Its thumb is shorter, less dramatically separated from the main body. The profile of its summit is slightly different, the arrangement of its layers creating a distinct silhouette. But like the East Mitten, it rises with impressive verticality from the valley floor, its walls nearly sheer, its presence commanding. Between the two mittens, the valley floor stretches away toward the horizon, a sweep of sand and sparse vegetation, punctuated by smaller formations and outcrops. The distance between the monuments creates a kind of gateway, a frame through which the deeper valley can be glimpsed. Photographers have used this composition endlessly, placing the two mittens on either side of their frames, using them to bracket views of the land beyond. Merrick Butte completes the trio of formations that dominate this part of the valley. Named after a prospector who met his end in these deserts in the 1880s, Merrick Butte lacks the distinctive thumb that characterizes the mittens, but makes up for it with its own massive presence. Its summit is slightly higher than the mittens, and its shape is more rounded, more dome-like. From certain angles, it appears almost pyramidal, though the horizontal layering of the stone prevents it from ever looking truly smooth or symmetrical. The naming of these formations reflects the complex history of Monument Valley. The Navajo people, who have inhabited this region for centuries, have their own names for these monuments, names that often refer to their spiritual significance or their resemblance to sacred beings. But the names that appear on most maps and in most guidebooks are English names given by settlers, surveyors, and tourists who arrived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Merrick Butte's name, for instance, commemorates James Merrick, who along with his partner, Ernest Mitchell, came to Monument Valley in search of a legendary silver mine. According to the story, Merrick and Mitchell had learned from Paiute Indians about rich silver deposits somewhere in the region. They entered the valley in 1879 or 1880, despite warnings about the dangers of the territory and the hostility of the Navajo toward trespassers. They were never seen alive again. Their bodies were found months later, stripped of supplies and valuables, killed by parties unknown. The story of Merrick and Mitchell is typical of many such tales from the American West, stories of prospectors and adventurers drawn by the promise of mineral wealth, often dying in pursuit of dreams that were more fantasy than reality. There is no evidence that significant silver deposits ever existed in Monument Valley. What the region offered instead was beauty and space, qualities that cannot be weighed or sold, but which have their own kind of value. The Navajo people who lived in and around Monument Valley at the time of Merrick and Mitchell's arrival had their own relationship with the land, one based not on extraction but on partnership. They grazed sheep on the sparse grasses. They grew corn and squash in the sandy soil, using techniques developed over generations to coax life from the desert. They gathered herbs and hunted game. They drew water from the springs that emerged from the base of the sandstone cliffs. And they wove the landscape into their spiritual and cultural understanding, creating a relationship with the land that was reciprocal rather than exploitative. Today, Monument Valley is part of the Navajo Nation, sovereign territory governed by the Navajo people themselves. The valley is managed as a Navajo tribal park, and visitors who come to see the monuments do so with the permission of the tribe and under regulations designed to protect both the land and the privacy of the Navajo families who still live and work in the valley. This arrangement is relatively recent, dating back only to the 1950s and 1960s, when the Navajo Nation began to take more active control of tourist development in the region. Before that, visitors came and went largely without regulation, sometimes showing little respect for the land or for the people who lived there. Photographers would snap pictures of Navajo families without asking permission. Tourists would wander across private land, disturbing livestock and sacred sites. Souvenir hunters would chip pieces from the monuments or disturb archaeological sites. The creation of the tribal park system allowed the Navajo Nation to protect Monument Valley while also providing economic opportunities for tribal members. Navajo guides lead tours into areas of the valley that are closed to unauthorized visitors. Navajo vendors sell jewelry, weavings, and other crafts at designated areas. Families operate tours using traditional horse-drawn wagons or modern four-wheel drive vehicles, sharing their knowledge of the land and their stories with visitors from around the world. This model of indigenous management of sacred and culturally important lands has become increasingly common, but Monument Valley was one of the pioneers. The system is not perfect. Balancing preservation with economic development is always challenging, and the heavy visitation that Monument Valley receives can create its own problems. But it represents a fundamental shift from the old model of national parks and monuments, where indigenous people were often removed from lands they had inhabited for generations so that those lands could be preserved for tourists. The view from the visitor center, where most people get their first glimpse of the Mittens and Merrick Butte, is carefully designed to showcase these formations to maximum effect. The parking area is positioned to create what photographers call a money shot, a composition that works regardless of the time of day, regardless of the season, regardless of the skill of the photographer. The two Mittens stand separated by just the right amount of space, with Merrick Butte positioned to create balance and depth. In the foreground, the sandy valley floor provides texture and context. In the background, additional monuments rise in the distance, creating layers of depth that draw the eye into the landscape. It is, in many ways, an impossible view, meaning that it is so perfect, so balanced, so composed, that it seems to have been designed rather than discovered. And in a sense, it was designed, not by human hands, but by the intersection of geology, erosion, and time, by the particular arrangement of joints in the sandstone, by the differential hardness of the various layers, by the action of wind and water over millions of years. Standing at this viewpoint, watching the light play across the monuments, seeing the shadows shift and the colors deepen, one cannot help but feel a sense of awe. Not the awe of something cute or clever or impressively human-made, but the deeper awe that comes from confronting geological time, from standing in the presence of forms that existed long before humans walked the earth and will exist long after we are gone. Deeper in the valley, past the iconic Mittens and Merrick Butte, the monuments take on different characters, different shapes. Some are broader, more massive, others are narrower, more delicate. And among the most striking are the spires, the tall, slender towers of stone that rise like the sacred poles of ancient ceremonies, reaching towards the sky with an audacity that seems to defy the laws of physics and the patient work of erosion. The Totem Pole, perhaps the most famous of these spires, stands in a remote section of the valley, accessible only by four-wheel drive vehicle or on foot. It is, in many ways, an impossible structure. A tower of sandstone, approximately 450 feet tall, but only 40 feet in diameter at its widest point. The proportions are extreme, giving the spire a sense of fragility, as if the next strong wind might topple it. Yet the totem pole has stood for thousands of years, and barring some catastrophic event, it will continue to stand for thousands more. Its survival is a testament to the strength of the Diné sandstone and to the particular arrangement of joints and layers that have allowed this pillar to resist the erosive forces that have removed everything around it. The totem pole does not stand alone. Nearby, an equally impressive spire called Tsé Biiʼ Ndzisgaii reaches for the same sky. Together, these formations create a landscape that seems almost alien, a forest of stone towers rising from the desert floor like the pillars of some vast ruined temple. The name Tsé Biiʼ Ndzisgaii comes from Navajo tradition. In Navajo ceremonial practice, the Tsé Biiʼ Ndzisgaii are holy people, supernatural beings who play important roles in healing ceremonies and other rituals. The name suggests the spiritual significance of this place to the Navajo people, the way that the landscape itself becomes part of religious and cultural understanding. To approach the totem pole is to experience scale in a new way. From a distance, the spire appears as a small vertical element in the landscape, interesting but not overwhelming. But as one draws closer, as the true height of the formation becomes apparent, the perspective shifts. The totem pole is not small at all. It towers overhead, its summit lost in the glare of the sky. Its walls are not smooth, but deeply textured, each layer of sandstone clearly visible, each variation in the stone's composition revealed in patterns of color and weathering.
The base of the totem pole is surrounded by a talus slope, a pile of boulders and smaller rocks that have fallen from above over the centuries. Some of these boulders are house-sized, broken from the main formation by frost wedging or by the gradual undermining of softer layers. They lie scattered across the desert floor, slowly themselves breaking down, contributing their sand to the valley. The vertical striations on the totem pole's face revealed the direction of the ancient dunes that formed the original sandstone. This stone began not as horizontal layers of sediment in a sea bottom, but as wind-blown sand dunes in a vast desert that existed during a later geological period. The dunes marched across the landscape, driven by prevailing winds, piling up sand grain by grain. Within each dune, the sand settled at the angle of repose, creating slanted layers called crossbeds. When these dunes were buried and lithified, the crossbedding was preserved in the stone. Now, exposed by erosion, these ancient dune structures are visible as subtle variations in texture and color running through the rock. In the totem pole, these structures are nearly vertical, suggesting that the ancient dunes were tall and steep, their slip faces oriented in a particular direction. The shadows cast by the totem pole and Tsé Biiʼ Ndzisgaii move across the desert floor like the hands of a sundial, marking the passage of time in the most ancient of ways. At noon, the shadows are short, pooled around the bases of the spires. In late afternoon, they stretch eastward, long fingers of darkness pointing across the sand. By sunset, the spires themselves block the direct sunlight, creating zones of cool shade, while their tops still glow with golden light. Photographers are drawn to these formations with an almost obsessive intensity. The challenge of capturing their verticality, their improbable slenderness, their relationship to the surrounding landscape has occupied countless artists. The most famous photograph of the totem pole is probably the image taken by Ansel Adams, the master of American landscape photography. Adams's image, made in the 1950s, shows the totem pole in dramatic side lighting, its vertical form emphasized by the play of light and shadow, its texture revealed in exquisite detail. But the totem pole and its surrounding formations mean something different to the Navajo people who live in their shadows. These are not merely scenic wonders or geological curiosities, they are part of a sacred landscape, a geography that is inseparable from Navajo cosmology and spiritual practice. In Navajo tradition, the landscape is alive with meaning. Every formation, every spring, every distinctive feature has its place in the web of stories and beliefs that give structure to Navajo culture. Some places are sacred because they were shaped by the holy people, the supernatural beings who created the world and taught the Navajo how to live in it. Other places are important because they mark the boundaries of the Navajo homeland, the territory defined by the 4 sacred mountains. Still others are significant because of events that occurred there in the historical or mythological past. Monument Valley sits within this sacred geography. It is part of Tsé, the canyon system that includes Canyon de Chelly to the north. It is within sight of Agathla Peak, one of the sacred mountains. It is land that the Navajo people walked back to after the Long Walk, the forced relocation to Bosque Redondo in the 1860s. It is land that has been home to Navajo families for generations, where grandparents and great-grandparents grazed sheep, where children learned traditional skills, where ceremonies were conducted and stories were told. The spires and monuments thus are not separate from Navajo life, but integral to it. They are landmarks in the literal sense, marks upon the land that provide orientation and identity. They are also sacred presences, reminders of forces and beings greater than human, connections to the spiritual realm. When the sun reaches its zenith and light falls equally across all surfaces, the shadows that give the monuments their dramatic character retreat to small pools around bases and under overhangs. The totem pole becomes a study in color rather than in form, its red and orange sandstone glowing against the deep blue of the desert sky. The temperature rises, sometimes to uncomfortable levels in summer, and the air shimmers with heat. This is when the valley seems most timeless, most removed from the ordinary world of human concerns. The heat and light are absolute. The silence is profound, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind or the cry of a raven. The monuments stand as they have always stood, indifferent to the passage of hours and days, patient in their slow transformation from stone to sand. In this stillness, in this heat, it becomes possible to imagine the valley at different moments in its long history, to imagine it when the ancestral Puebloan people built their dwellings in the alcoves and canyon walls, raising children and growing corn in this harsh but beautiful land. To imagine it when the Navajo first arrived, bringing with them their sheep and their stories, adapting to the desert and making it home. To imagine it before any humans at all, when the only sounds were wind and the occasional crack of stone breaking away from the monuments, when the only witnesses to the valley's beauty were the animals that came to drink at the rare springs. And to imagine it further back still in geological time, when these monuments did not exist, when the stone that forms them was still buried beneath layers that have since been eroded away, when the entire region was a flat plateau, unmarked by the dramatic topography we see today, when the forces that would create Monument Valley were just beginning their patient work, grain by grain, year by year, millennium by millennium. The totem pole will not stand forever. Like all the monuments in the valley, it is slowly being worn away by wind and water, by the expansion and contraction caused by temperature changes, by the chemical weathering of the minerals that cement its sand grains together. Eventually, perhaps tens of thousands of years from now, perhaps hundreds of thousands, the totem pole will collapse. A major storm or a particularly severe freeze might weaken it beyond its capacity to resist gravity, or it might simply slowly erode, getting thinner and thinner until one day it is no longer capable of supporting its own weight. When the totem pole falls, the sand and boulders that composed it will join the talus pile at its base. Over more time, those boulders themselves will break down, becoming smaller rocks, then pebbles, then sand.
Wind and water will carry that sand away, distributing it across the valley and beyond, perhaps all the way to the Colorado River, which will carry it to the Sea of Cortez, where it may once again settle on a sea bottom, beginning a new cycle of sedimentation and lithification. But for now, in this moment, the totem pole stands. It reaches toward the sky with improbable grace. It catches the light and casts its shadow. It serves as home to lichens and to the occasional bird that nests on its ledges. And it reminds those who see it that beauty can be found in the most unlikely places, that grandeur does not require permanence, and that the slow work of geological time can create wonders that exceed any human imagining. To understand Monument Valley is to understand the people who call it home, and to understand those people requires stepping back through history, through the stories and struggles that brought the Navajo, the Diné as they call themselves, to this land of red stone and endless sky. The Diné are relative newcomers to the Southwest, at least in geological terms. While the rocks of Monument Valley were forming over hundreds of millions of years, while the ancestral Puebloan people were building their cities and farming the canyons, the Navajo ancestors were still in the far north, part of the Athabascan language family that ranges from Alaska to the American Southwest. The exact timing of the Navajo migration southward is debated by scholars, but most agree that they arrived in the Southwest sometime between 1400 and 1600 CE. They came as nomadic hunters and gatherers, bringing with them a language and cultural traditions distinct from the Puebloan peoples they encountered. But the Navajo proved remarkably adaptive, adopting agriculture from the Pueblos, learning to weave, incorporating new spiritual practices while maintaining their own distinctive worldview. When the Spanish arrived in the Southwest in the 16th century, the Navajo found the already established in the region. The Spanish brought with them horses, sheep, and goats, animals that would transform Navajo culture. The Navajo became skilled horsemen and adopted sheep herding as a central part of their economy and way of life. Sheep provided wool for weaving, meat for food, and a form of wealth that could be accumulated and passed down through generations. The Navajo relationship with the land was fundamentally different from the European concept of land ownership. For the Navajo, land was not a commodity to be bought and sold, but a living entity with which humans had a reciprocal relationship. The land provided for the people, and the people, in turn, had responsibilities to the land, to treat it with respect, to perform the proper ceremonies, to live in balance and harmony. Monument Valley became part of the Navajo homeland, a place where families grazed their sheep, where children were born and elders were buried, where the stories and ceremonies that gave structure to Navajo life were passed from generation to generation. The spires and monuments thus are not separate from Navajo life, but integral to it. They are land.
But the Navajo did not break. They maintained their identity, kept their language and their stories alive, and continuously petitioned for the right to return to their homeland. Finally, in 1868, the U.S. government admitted the failure of the Bosque Redondo experiment. A treaty was signed allowing the Navajo to return to a portion of their original homeland. The journey back was triumphant and heartbreaking. The returning Navajo found a land that had been stripped of much of its wealth. The sheep herds were gone, the fields had returned to desert, the homes had been destroyed. But it was home. The sacred mountains were visible on the horizon. The land recognized them, and they recognized the land. Monument Valley was part of the homeland to which they returned. Families re-established themselves in the valley and in the surrounding canyons. They rebuilt their sheep herds, starting with a few animals and gradually increasing their numbers. They replanted their fields. They reconstructed their hogans, the traditional eight-sided homes that are oriented to the cardinal directions and built according to precise ceremonial specifications. Life was not easy. The land is harsh, the resources limited. Rainfall is sparse and unpredictable. The soil is sandy and not particularly fertile. Water must be hauled from distant springs or collected from rare rainstorms. In winter, the valley can be bitterly cold. In summer, the heat is intense, but the Navajo persevered, applying generations of knowledge about how to live in this environment, adapting to the new reality of reservation life while maintaining their cultural identity. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Navajo families in Monument Valley lived much as their ancestors had, with modifications. They grazed sheep on the sparse grasses, moving their herds seasonally to avoid overgrazing. They grew corn, squash, and melons in small fields, using techniques developed over centuries to make the most of limited water. They wove rugs from the wool of their sheep, creating intricate patterns that had both aesthetic and symbolic meaning. They worked silver into jewelry, combining traditional designs with new techniques learned from Mexican and Pueblo silversmiths. The hogans dotted across Monument Valley and the surrounding region were more than just houses. They were sacred spaces, built according to traditional specifications, oriented to the cardinal directions, constructed with doorways facing east to greet the rising sun. Each hogan was blessed with corn pollen and prayers when it was completed. Each represented a continuation of Navajo tradition, a physical manifestation of the proper way to live in harmony with the natural and spiritual worlds. Children grew up learning traditional skills and stories. Boys learned to herd sheep, to care for horses, to track animals across the desert. Girls learned to weave, to grind corn, to gather plants for food and medicine. Both learned the stories, the creation narrative that explained how the Navajo emerged through different worlds to reach this one. The stories of the holy people and their interactions with humans, the stories of the hero twins who made the world safe for the Diné, and countless other narratives that encoded knowledge, values, and identity. But the 20th century brought new challenges and changes. The U.S. government's policies towards the Navajo and other indigenous peoples shifted over the decades, from outright hostility to attempted forced assimilation to a degree of recognition of indigenous rights and sovereignty. Navajo children were often forced to attend boarding schools, where they were forbidden to speak their language or practice their culture, where the explicit goal was to kill the Indian, save the man. This traumatic experience created a generation of Navajo people torn between two worlds, fluent in neither Navajo nor English culture, struggling to find their place. Yet the Navajo language and culture survived, in part because of the strength of family ties and the determination of elders who continued to teach the old ways, and in part because the land itself served as a repository of cultural memory. Every feature of the landscape carried stories and meanings that reinforced Navajo identity. Monument Valley, with its dramatic monuments and its role in Navajo cosmology, was part of this living cultural landscape. In the 1930s, Monument Valley began to attract attention from outside the Navajo world. Hollywood discovered the valley, and director John Ford made it the setting for his Western films, beginning with Stagecoach in 1939. The stunning visual impact of the monuments as the backdrop for the stories Ford wanted to tell made Monument Valley instantly iconic, recognizable around the world as the quintessential American West. This attention brought both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, tourism provided economic opportunities for Navajo families living in and around the valley. Some served as guides or extras in films. Others sold crafts and jewelry to the tourists who began to arrive in increasing numbers. The income from tourism could supplement the meager living provided by sheep herding and farming. On the other hand, the influx of outsiders brought disruptions. Photographers and tourists sometimes showed little respect for Navajo privacy or property. Sacred sites were disturbed. The very presence of so many visitors changed the character of the land. The Navajo had to negotiate a new relationship with Monument Valley, one that acknowledged both its economic value and its cultural and spiritual significance. The establishment of Monument Valley as a Navajo tribal park in 1958 was an attempt to balance these competing interests. Under this system, the Navajo Nation maintained control over the land while welcoming visitors and managing tourism. Navajo guides were authorized to lead tours into areas closed to general visitation.
Vendors were given designated areas to sell crafts. Regulations protected both the monuments and the privacy of Navajo families still living in the valley. Today, Monument Valley remains home to Navajo families, though in smaller numbers than in the past. Modern life has brought changes: paved roads, electricity in some areas, vehicles replacing horses for transportation. Young people often leave the valley for education and employment, drawn to cities where economic opportunities are greater. Yet many maintain connections to the land, returning for ceremonies and family gatherings, preserving language and traditions even while navigating the complexities of contemporary American life. The sheep are still there, grazing on the sparse vegetation, tended by herders who continue a tradition that stretches generations. The hogans still stand, though many are now used primarily for ceremonies rather than as year-round residences. The weaving continues, with Navajo women creating rugs and textiles that are prized by collectors around the world for their beauty and craftsmanship. And the stories continue to be told. In the evenings when work is done and families gather, the old narratives are shared. Stories of the holy people, stories of the long walk and the return home, stories that locate the Navajo people in time and space, that explain who they are and where they came from and how they should live. Monument Valley is central to many of these stories. The monuments themselves sometimes identified with particular spiritual beings or events from Navajo mythology. The land is seen not as a scenic backdrop, but as a living presence, an active participant in Navajo life. To walk across the valley floor, to look up at the towering buttes and spires, is not simply to observe geological formations, but to move through a landscape saturated with meaning, where every feature carries significance. This indigenous perspective offers a different way of understanding Monument Valley, one that complements but differs from the geological and scenic perspectives. Where a geologist sees layers of sandstone deposited over millions of years and then eroded into dramatic forms, a Navajo person might see the work of the holy people, the shaping of the world during the time of creation. Where a tourist sees a beautiful landscape perfect for photographs, a Navajo person might see home, or sacred space, or the land where ancestors are buried. These perspectives are not mutually exclusive. The Navajo have always been pragmatic and adaptive, able to incorporate new knowledge and new ways of seeing while maintaining their core cultural identity. A Navajo geologist can understand the scientific processes that created Monument Valley while also appreciating its spiritual significance. A Navajo artist can sell work to tourists while weaving into that work patterns and symbols that carry deep cultural meaning. What is crucial is that the Navajo maintain control over their own land and their own narrative. Monument Valley is not a museum or a park in the American traditional sense, where the land is set aside and preserved in some idealized, pristine state. It is a living landscape, home to people who have every right to continue living there, making their living there, practicing their culture there. The challenge for the future is maintaining this balance, protecting the monuments and the landscape from overuse and damage, while also respecting the rights and needs of the Navajo people who call Monument Valley home. Tourism brings income, but it also brings impacts. Climate change threatens to make the already arid landscape even drier, putting stress on the limited water resources. Economic development offers opportunities, but can also disrupt traditional ways of life. Yet, if any people have shown the resilience and adaptability needed to navigate these challenges, it is the Diné. They have survived genocidal policies, forced relocation, cultural suppression, and economic marginalization.
The monuments of Monument Valley are not uniform in color, though they are often described simply as red. This is an oversimplification that fails to capture the remarkable range and subtlety of hues that paint the landscape. The stone is a palette of reds, yes, but also oranges, purples, browns, tans, creams, and even grays and blacks. These colors shift with the light, with the weather, with the seasons, creating an ever-changing display that has captivated artists and photographers for generations. The red color that dominates the visual impression of Monument Valley comes from iron oxide, essentially rust. The sandstone contains iron-bearing minerals, particularly feldspar, that weather over time. As water percolates through the porous stone, it carries dissolved iron. When this iron-rich water encounters oxygen, either in the air or dissolved in the water itself, the iron oxidizes, forming iron oxide that coats individual sand grains and fills the tiny spaces between them. The specific shade of red depends on the form of iron oxide present. Hematite, one of the most common iron oxide minerals, produces the deep brick red color that characterizes much of Monument Valley's sandstone. This is the red of dried blood, of bricks baked in fire, of the earth itself. It is a warm color, one that seems to hold heat even in the cool of morning or evening. But the coloration is not uniform throughout the stone. Different layers were exposed to different degrees of oxidation as they formed. Some layers are more heavily stained with iron oxide, producing deeper reds or even purples. Other layers contain less iron, appearing lighter, more tan or cream-colored. This variation creates the horizontal banding that is so characteristic of the monuments, alternating stripes of darker and lighter stone that emphasize the sedimentary nature of the rock. In some places, the iron oxide has concentrated along vertical fractures in the stone, creating dark streaks called desert varnish. This varnish is a complex coating made up of iron and manganese oxides along with clay minerals and other materials. Despite decades of study, geologists still debate exactly how desert varnish forms. It seems to involve a combination of chemical weathering, wind-blown dust, bacterial action, and water movement. Whatever the process, the result is dark, often black coatings that stand out dramatically against the red sandstone beneath. Desert varnish gives the monuments a weathered, aged appearance, as if they have been painted by time itself. The dark streaks flow down vertical faces like frozen waterfalls, following the paths where water occasionally runs during storms. In some areas, the varnish is so extensive that entire sections of cliff face appear black or dark brown, providing contrast to the lighter red of adjacent areas. White also appears in the color spectrum of Monument Valley, though less prominently than the reds and browns. Gypsum, a soft sulfate mineral, occurs in some layers of the sedimentary sequence. When exposed at the surface, gypsum appears white or cream-colored, creating light-colored bands within the predominantly red stone. These white layers are generally thinner and less resistant to erosion than the iron-stained sandstone, but where they occur, they add another dimension to the monument's coloration. The white of gypsum is not a pure, bright white, but rather a soft, warm white, like old ivory or cream. It seems to glow in certain lights, particularly in the golden hours of sunrise and sunset, when the red tones are most intense. The contrast between the white gypsum and the red sandstone creates visual interest, breaking up what might otherwise be a monotonous expanse of red. Tan and brown tones appear where the sandstone is less heavily stained with iron oxide. These colors are closer to the natural color of the quartz sand that makes up the bulk of the stone, the color of beach sand or desert sand, warm and neutral. In overhangs and alcoves where the stone has been protected from weathering, these lighter colors sometimes predominate, offering a glimpse of what the entire formation might have looked like before oxidation added the red staining. Purple appears in certain layers and in certain lights, a subtle hue that seems to shift between red and blue, depending on the angle of viewing and the quality of the light. This purple may result from a different form of iron oxide or from the mixture of red iron oxide with darker minerals. Whatever its source, it adds a note of mystery to the color palette, a suggestion of depths and complexities beyond the obvious. Gray appears primarily in areas of extensive desert varnish, but also in some of the talus debris at the bases of the monuments. Fresh breaks in the stone, where rocks have recently fallen from the cliff faces, often reveal a lighter gray interior, the color of the stone before weathering has had a chance to stain it.
These fresh surfaces stand out among the weathered, oxidized stones surrounding them, offering evidence of the ongoing processes of erosion and decay. Black is the color of the densest desert varnish and of certain shale layers interbedded with the sandstone. The Organ Rock Shale, which underlies much of the valley and forms the lower slopes of many monuments, is a dark reddish-brown when fresh, but can appear almost black when heavily varnished. The contrast between this dark shale and the brighter red sandstone creates a clear visual break that emphasizes the monument's stratification. But describing these colors individually fails to capture how they interact, how they blend and contrast to create the overall visual experience of Monument Valley. The colors are not discrete bands or patches, but a continuous gradation, a shifting interplay of hues that changes with every shift in perspective, every change in the light. In the flat light of midday, when the sun is directly overhead, the colors can appear somewhat muted, washed out by the intensity of the illumination. The reds are still present, but they lack the vibrancy of angled light. The contrasts between different layers are less pronounced. The monuments can seem almost two-dimensional, painted cutouts against the sky. But when the light comes from the side, as it does in early morning and late afternoon, the colors come alive. The reds deepen and glow. The shadows take on their own colors, purples and deep browns, sometimes appearing almost blue in contrast to the warm tones of the sunlit areas. The horizontal layering becomes dramatically visible, each band of color distinct and clear. The desert varnish creates vertical accents, dark streaks that draw the eye upward, emphasizing the monument's height. Photographers and artists have long struggled to capture these colors accurately. Film and digital sensors respond to light differently than the human eye, and the extreme dynamic range of Monument Valley, the extreme bright sunlit areas and the deep shadows, challenges even modern camera technology. Many photographs of the valley have been enhanced in processing, the colors saturated beyond reality to create more dramatic images. While these enhanced images can be beautiful, they sometimes lose the subtlety of the actual colors, the delicate gradations and unexpected hues that give the landscape its complexity.
The Navajo people have their own understanding of these colors, one that goes beyond purely visual appreciation. In Navajo cosmology, certain colors have sacred significance. White, blue, yellow, and black are the colors of the 4 sacred mountains that define the Navajo homeland. These colors appear in sand paintings used in healing ceremonies, in the colors of corn used in rituals, in the directional associations that structure Navajo space. The reds and browns of Monument Valley might be associated with the earth itself, with the blood of the living world, with the life force that animates all things. White might represent purity, new beginnings, the dawn. Black might be associated with the night sky, with completion, with the male principle. These associations are not rigid or simple, but complex and context-dependent, woven into a web of meanings that encompasses the entire Navajo worldview. The changing colors of Monument Valley also mark the passage of time in a daily and seasonal cycle. At dawn, the monuments emerge from the uniform blue-gray of pre-dawn light, the colors gradually differentiating as the sun rises. Reds appear first on the eastern faces, spreading as the sun climbs. By mid-morning, the entire valley is bathed in warm light, the colors at their most neutral and balanced. Afternoon brings a shift toward cooler tones on the eastern faces, now in shadow, while the western faces remain in warm sunlight. By late afternoon, as the sun begins its descent, the light becomes distinctly golden, adding yellow tones to the reds and making the entire landscape glow. Sunset brings the most dramatic colors of all, reds so intense they seem to come from within the stone, purples in the shadows, oranges and golds in the sky that are reflected subtly in the monument's surfaces. After sunset, in the brief twilight, the colors shift again. The bright reds fade to deeper burgundies and purples. The sky glows with alpenglow, reflected light that can make the monuments appear almost pink or mauve.
And then, as darkness falls, all color drains away, and the monuments become dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. Seasonally, the colors also change, though more subtly. Spring can bring a brief greening to the valley floor as winter moisture supports a flush of plant growth. This green, though sparse, provides contrast to the red of the monuments. Summer heat intensifies the colors, the reds seeming to deepen, the shadows to darken. Autumn brings cooler temperatures and the possibility of early snows, which dust the monuments with white, creating a striking contrast between the red stone and white snow. Winter occasionally brings more substantial snows to Monument Valley, transforming the landscape entirely. The monuments, partially covered with white, take on a completely different character. The reds seem more intense where they show through the snow, the contrast more striking. The valley floor becomes a white expanse, broken only by the dark shapes of juniper and sage. It is a temporary transformation. The snow rarely lasts more than a few days in this desert environment, but while it lasts, it offers yet another variation in Monument Valley's endless display of color. Understanding these colors, appreciating their subtlety and their complexity, is part of understanding Monument Valley itself. The landscape is not static but dynamic, constantly changing, constantly revealing new aspects of its character. The colors are not mere decoration, but an expression of the stone's nature, of the minerals that compose it, of the processes that have shaped it, of the light that illuminates it. To see Monument Valley in its full chromatic glory, one must spend time there, must watch the light change, must observe the colors shift and flow across the monument's faces. A single photograph, a single moment cannot capture the full range of colors and their transformations. Only patient observation, only a willingness to simply sit and watch as the light moves and changes can reveal the true chromatic richness of this extraordinary landscape. The year turns in Monument Valley with a rhythm set by forces beyond human control. The seasons here are not the distinct quarters of spring, summer, autumn, and winter that characterize more temperate climates. Instead, they are defined by the presence or absence of moisture, by temperature extremes, by the angle of the sun and the strength of the wind. Each season brings its own challenges and its own beauties to the valley, its own particular quality of light and weather. Spring arrives tentatively in Monument Valley, not with a sudden greening but with subtle shifts. The days grow longer, the sun climbs higher in the sky, and the intense cold of winter begins to moderate. Daytime temperatures rise into the comfortable range, though nights can still be cold, sometimes dropping below freezing. The wind, which blows almost constantly across the valley, carries a different quality now, less bitter, less penetrating, though still strong enough to raise dust devils that dance across the desert floor. This is the season of possibility, when the sparse winter moisture might, if conditions are right, trigger a brief explosion of plant life. Desert annuals whose seeds have lain dormant in the sand, perhaps for years, germinate when moisture and temperature reach the right combination. Suddenly, the valley floor is dotted with wildflowers, tiny blooms of purple, yellow, white, and red, each species adapted to make the most of this brief opportunity. The flowers are small, easy to overlook among the dramatic monuments, but up close they reveal exquisite beauty. Indian bright batch adds splashes of red. Desert marigolds create patches of yellow. Evening primrose opens white flowers that glow in the twilight. These blooms are ephemeral, lasting only a few weeks before the heat of summer desiccates them, and they drop their seeds to wait for next year's rains. Even the seemingly barren sand reveals life in spring. Cryptobiotic soil, a living crust of algae, lichens, mosses, and cyanobacteria, becomes more visible when moistened by spring rains. This crust is crucial to the desert ecosystem, stabilizing sand, retaining moisture, fixing nitrogen from the air, and providing a foundation for other plant life. It is fragile, easily destroyed by foot traffic or vehicles, but where it remains intact, it gives the sand a dark, textured appearance. The animals of Monument Valley become more active in spring. Lizards emerge from winter dormancy, basking on rocks to warm their cold-blooded bodies. Ravens build nests on ledges high on the monument faces, where they will raise their young safe from ground predators. Rabbits become more visible, feeding on the new plant growth. The occasional coyote might be spotted, trotting across the valley floor, hunting for rodents. But spring in Monument Valley can also bring storms. The jet stream, which in winter flows well to the south, begins its migration northward. Weather systems moving across the southwest can bring wind and rain, sometimes snow at higher elevations. These spring storms are often dramatic, with dark clouds gathering over the monuments, lightning striking the spires, and brief but intense downpours that send water sheeting across the desert floor. These storms are both blessing and danger. The moisture they bring is essential for the desert ecosystem, but the runoff can create flash floods that roar through normally dry washes, carrying everything before them. The wise traveler in Monument Valley in spring keeps an eye on the sky and knows to avoid low-lying areas when storms threaten. Summer arrives not gradually, but suddenly. The temperature spikes, jumping from comfortable to hot almost overnight. By June, daytime temperatures regularly exceed 90 degrees Fahrenheit, often reaching into the 100th. The low humidity means that the heat is not oppressive in the way it might be in more humid climates, but it is nonetheless intense, radiating from the sand and the stone, creating shimmering heat waves that distort distant views. The monuments themselves become radiant in the summer heat. The sandstone absorbs the sun's energy and holds it, remaining warm to the touch even after the sun has set. To be in Monument Valley at midday in summer is to experience heat in its purest form, unmitigated by shade or moisture, absolute and undeniable.
Life adapts to this heat. Animals become crepuscular, active in the relative cool of early morning and evening, sheltering during the heat of the day. Lizards, which might seem heat-adapted, actually have limits to their temperature tolerance and will retreat to shade or burrows when the sun is at its strongest. The few mammals in the area, coyotes, foxes, rabbits, are rarely seen during daylight hours in summer, emerging only when temperatures moderate. Plants survive through drought tolerance. The junipers and sagebrush that dot the valley have deep root systems that reach down to water far below the surface. Their leaves are often small and waxy, adaptations that reduce water loss through transpiration. Many plants simply shut down during the hottest, driest part of summer, going dormant until conditions improve. But summer also brings the monsoon. Starting typically in July and continuing through September, the summer monsoon pattern brings moisture from the Gulf of California northward into the southwest. Humid air masses collide with the intense heat, creating towering thunderstorms that build in the afternoon and evening. These monsoon storms are spectacular. Clouds that start as small puffs of cumulus in the morning grow throughout the day, building into towering cumulonimbus that reach 30 or 40,000 feet into the atmosphere. The clouds are brilliant white where the sun strikes them, dark gray or even black in their hearts where the densest moisture accumulates. By late afternoon, the storms begin to unleash their energy. Lightning flashes from cloud to cloud and from cloud to ground, striking the tallest monuments, creating a display of raw electrical power. Thunder rolls across the valley, echoing from the stone walls, sometimes so close and so loud that it is felt as a physical sensation. Then the rain comes. Not the gentle showers of more humid climates, but intense downpours that can drop an inch or more of rain in an hour. The dry sand of the valley floor cannot absorb moisture at this rate. Water begins to flow across the surface, gathering in low spots, converging into temporary streams that rush through normally dry washes.
Flash floods are a real danger during monsoon storms. A wash that was completely dry moments before can suddenly be running wall to wall with muddy, debris-laden water. These floods move with surprising speed and power, capable of moving boulders, undermining roads, sweeping away unwary animals or people. They are one of the primary agents of erosion in Monument Valley, doing in minutes work that wind might take years to accomplish. But the monsoon rains are also life-giving. They replenish the sparse vegetation, trigger a brief second flowering season for some plants, fill potholes in the rock where they will slowly evaporate, providing drinking water for wildlife. The rain cools the air, at least temporarily, bringing relief from the heat, and it creates visual spectacles, rainbows arcing across the valley, curtains of virga hanging from clouds without reaching the ground, the monuments emerging from storm clouds into bright sunlight. Autumn comes as a gradual moderation of summer's extremes. The monsoon pattern breaks down, the storms become less frequent, the temperatures begin to drop. Daytime highs fall from the 100s into the 90s, then the 80s, then the comfortable 70s. Nights become cool, even cold, requiring blankets or jackets. The light changes in autumn. The sun, which in summer was nearly overhead at midday, begins to trace a lower arc across the southern sky. The light becomes more angled, creating longer shadows, emphasizing the three-dimensional quality of the monuments. Photographers favor autumn and spring for this quality of light, which brings out textures and details that the flat light of summer obscures. The sparse vegetation responds to the changing season. Plants that have been dormant through the heat begin to prepare for winter. Deciduous plants, though rare in this desert environment, begin to show autumn colors. The cottonwoods that grow near the rare springs turn yellow and gold. The rabbitbrush blooms with bright yellow flowers, a last splash of color before winter. Animals prepare for the lean months ahead. Those that do not hibernate fatten up, feeding intensively while food is still available. Those that do hibernate begin to slow down, their metabolisms preparing for the long sleep. Birds that migrate begin their journeys, heading south to warmer climates. Others arrive from even colder regions to the north, wintering in Monument Valley, where the temperatures, while cold, are more moderate than in their summer ranges. Winter brings the harshest conditions to Monument Valley. Temperatures drop below freezing regularly at night, sometimes remaining below freezing all day. The monuments, which held heat so tenaciously in summer, now seem to radiate cold. Wind becomes brutal, driving across the valley without obstruction, cutting through clothing, creating wind chills that make the actual temperature feel even colder. Snow is possible in winter, though not guaranteed. Some winters bring several substantial snowfalls that blanket the valley in white. Other winters pass with only a dusting or two, barely enough to count. When snow does come, it transforms Monument Valley entirely. The red monuments rising from a white valley floor create a contrast so striking that it seems almost artificial, like a painting rather than reality. The snow rarely lasts long. The high desert environment, even in winter, has strong sun during the day, and the snow that falls sublimes, transforms directly from solid to vapor almost as quickly as it melts. Within days, sometimes within hours, the white disappears, leaving only the traces in sheltered spots and on north-facing slopes. Winter is a quiet time in Monument Valley. Tourism drops to its lowest level of the year. The Navajo families who live in the valley hunker down, staying close to their homes, venturing out only as necessary. The animals that remain active are fewer and harder to spot, conserving energy, moving as little as possible. But even in winter, Monument Valley holds beauty. The light is clear and sharp, the air so dry and clean that distant monuments appear closer than they are. Sunrises and sunsets can be spectacular, the low angle of the sun creating dramatic displays of color.
And at night, when the temperature drops towards zero and the sky is utterly clear, the stars appear with a brilliance impossible in more populated, light-polluted areas. The cycle of seasons in Monument Valley is both predictable and unpredictable. The general patterns, hot summers, cold winters, spring and fall transitions, are reliable, but the specifics vary from year to year. Some years bring generous moisture, others severe drought. Some winters are mild, others brutal. The desert does not give up its secrets easily, does not conform to human expectations of what weather should do. The Navajo people who have lived in Monument Valley for generations understand this variability. Their traditional practices evolved to deal with uncertainty, to make the most of good years while surviving bad ones. Sheep herding is well suited to the variable conditions. Sheep can graze on sparse vegetation, can be moved to take advantage of temporary good conditions, can be sold off in bad years to reduce herd size to sustainable levels. The seasonal cycle also structures traditional ceremonies and activities. Certain ceremonies are performed at specific times of year, aligned with the solstices or with the agricultural calendar. The timing of sheep shearing, of planting and harvest, of moving camps between winter and summer locations, all follow patterns set by season and weather. To understand Monument Valley fully is to understand it through all its seasons, to experience the heat of summer and the cold of winter, the brief greening of spring and the golden light of autumn. Each season reveals different aspects of the landscape, different moods and beauties. Together, they create a complete picture of a land shaped by extremes, a land that is simultaneously harsh and beautiful, challenging and rewarding. When the sun sets over Monument Valley and the last light fades from the western sky, a different valley emerges. The monuments, so dominant in daylight, become dark silhouettes, barely visible against the deepening blue of the sky. The details of layering and color that's so apparent in sunlight disappear into shadow. The landscape becomes simpler, reduced to basic forms. The vertical thrust of the monuments, the horizontal expanse of the valley floor, the dome of the sky overhead. And then the stars begin to appear. First, the brightest, Venus if it is in the right part of its orbit, Jupiter, the bright star Sirius, then more as eyes adapt to darkness and as the sky darkens further. Within an hour of sunset, thousands of stars are visible, scattered across the sky in patterns that humans have recognized and named for millennia.
Monument Valley, located far from major cities and large population centers, has naturally dark skies. There is no dome of light pollution washing out the stars, no orange glow on the horizon from distant urban areas. When the moon is down, when there are no headlights or campfires, the darkness is profound. And in that darkness, the stars shine with a brilliance that most modern humans rarely see. The Milky Way arcs across the sky, a band of light composed of billions of individual stars too faint and distant to resolve separately, but which together create a luminous river stretching from horizon to horizon. In the darkest locations and on the darkest nights, the Milky Way is bright enough to cast shadows, bright enough to illuminate the monuments with soft starlight, bright enough to navigate by. To the Navajo people, the night sky is not a random scattering of stars, but an ordered cosmos filled with meaning and significance. Constellations, different from those recognized by Western astronomy, mark the sky. Stories explain how these star patterns came to be, what they represent, and what their movements signify. The Pleiades, that cluster of stars known in Western astronomy as the Seven Sisters, holds particular importance in Navajo tradition. The cluster is associated with the planting season, with new beginnings, with the cyclical nature of time. When the Pleiades appear in the eastern sky before dawn in early summer, it marks the time for planting. When they disappear into the sun's glare in spring, it signals the changing of seasons. Other star groups are identified with important figures from Navajo mythology. The constellation that Western astronomy calls Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, has different significance in Navajo star lore. Individual bright stars are associated with specific stories and teachings. The movement of these stars across the sky, their rising and setting at different seasons, provides a celestial calendar that structures time and activity. Planets, which appear as stars but move against the background of fixed stars, hold their own significance. Their wandering paths across the sky, their occasional retrograde motions, their different colors and brightnesses, all contribute to their role in Navajo cosmology. But beyond the cultural and spiritual significance, the night sky over Monument Valley offers something more fundamental, a connection to the universe beyond our small planet, a visceral reminder of our place in a cosmos that extends far beyond the everyday concerns of human life. Standing in Monument Valley at night under skies filled with stars, surrounded by monuments that have witnessed millions of sunrises and sunsets, it becomes impossible not to feel the weight of time and space. The light from the stars has traveled for years, decades, centuries, even millions of years to reach our eyes. We are seeing the universe not as it is now, but as it was in the past. The stars we see may no longer exist. They may have gone supernovae or collapsed into black holes or simply drifted to different positions in their long journeys through space. The monuments themselves become astronomical instruments of a sort. Their vertical spires point toward the celestial pole, the point in the sky around which all the stars seem to rotate. Long exposure photographs taken from Monument Valley show star trails, the apparent circular paths that stars trace across the sky as the Earth rotates. These photographs create stunning images, the dark forms of the monuments in the foreground, concentric circles of star trails in the sky above. The moon, when it is visible, transforms the nighttime valley in different ways depending on its phase and position. A full moon rising over the monuments can be spectacular, the lunar disk appearing enormous as it breaks the horizon, its light bright enough to cast distinct shadows and to reveal colors in the landscape that are invisible in starlight alone. The monuments in moonlight take on a ghostly quality, their forms softened, their colors muted but still present. A crescent moon setting in the west after sunset creates more subtle effects. Its thin arc of light hangs in the darkening sky, bright enough to draw the eye, but not bright enough to wash out the stars. In the moments after the moon sets, the sky darkens perceptibly and more stars become visible. New moon periods, when the moon is in conjunction with the sun and invisible from Earth, provide the darkest skies. These are the best times for stargazing, when the Milky Way is most visible, when faint nebulae and galaxies can be glimpsed with binoculars or small telescopes, when meteor showers put on their best displays. Meteor showers occur predictably throughout the year as the Earth passes through streams of debris left behind by comets. The Perseids in August, the Geminis in December, and other annual showers send dozens or even hundreds of shooting stars streaking across the sky per hour during their peaks. In Monument Valley, far from city lights, these showers are spectacular. The meteors appear to radiate from specific points in the sky, streaking outward in all directions, brief flashes of light as tiny particles no larger than grains of sand burn up in the upper atmosphere. Occasionally, rarer celestial events grace the skies above Monument Valley. Bright comets, though infrequent, can be spectacular when they do appear. Eclipses, both lunar and solar, create temporary disruptions of the normal celestial order. The northern lights, aurora borealis, occasionally reach far enough south to be visible from Monument Valley, though this is rare and depends on particularly strong solar storms. But even without these special events, even on an ordinary night, the sky over Monument Valley offers wonders.
The Andromeda Galaxy, the nearest large galaxy to our own Milky Way, is visible to the naked eye from dark locations like Monument Valley, a faint fuzzy patch of light that represents a collection of hundreds of billions of stars located over 2 million light-years away. The light we see from Andromeda left that galaxy before humans evolved on Earth. Satellites cross the sky regularly, bright points of light moving steadily against the background stars. These are human-made objects, orbiting the Earth at altitudes of a few hundred miles. The International Space Station, when its orbit brings it overhead at the right time, is one of the brightest objects in the sky, brighter than any star or planet, moving visibly from horizon to horizon in a matter of minutes. Occasional airplanes cross the sky, their position lights blinking, their sound arriving seconds later as the aircraft itself passes overhead. These reminders of modern technology create a contrast with the ancient landscape and the timeless stars, the intersection of human timescale and cosmic timescale. For photographers, the night sky over Monument Valley presents both opportunities and challenges. Photographing the stars requires long exposures to gather enough light to create a visible image. But the Earth's rotation means that during long exposures, the stars appear to move, creating trails rather than points. To capture stars as points of light requires either very short exposures, which limit the number of visible stars, or specialized tracking equipment that rotates the camera to follow the star's apparent motion.
The monuments themselves, being dark, require careful technique to capture in nighttime photographs. Light painting, using flashlights or other artificial lights to illuminate the monuments during the exposure, can create dramatic images, though it requires practice to achieve natural-looking results. Some photographers wait for moonlight to illuminate the monuments naturally, creating images that show both the landscape and the stars. The experience of spending a night under the stars in Monument Valley is transformative in ways that are difficult to articulate. There is a silence and a stillness that allows for contemplation. The vastness of the sky induces a kind of awe, a recognition of our small place in an immense universe. The beauty of the stars, the elegance of the monument's silhouettes, the perfect clarity of the air, all combine to create moments that feel outside ordinary time. Many visitors report that their night in Monument Valley, under the stars, surrounded by the silent monuments, becomes one of their most memorable experiences. It is a time to think about geological time, about the age of the universe, about the brief flash of human life against the backdrop of deep time. It is a time to appreciate beauty for its own sake, without need for interpretation or explanation. For the Navajo people who live in Monument Valley, the night sky is not a tourist attraction, but a familiar presence, part of the rhythm of life. Shepherds watching their flocks navigate by the stars. Elders teaching young people identify the constellations and tell the stories associated with them. Ceremonial practitioners use the positions of stars and planets to time certain rituals. This living connection to the night sky represents something that most modern humans have lost. In cities where artificial light washes out the stars, where buildings block the horizon, where the pace of life leaves little time for stargazing, the night sky has become almost invisible. People can live their entire lives without seeing the Milky Way, without identifying a single constellation, without watching a meteor shower or tracking the phases of the moon. Monument Valley preserves not just a landscape, but a way of seeing, a relationship with the cosmos that is ancient and profound. Standing there at night, under stars that have guided travelers and inspired storytellers for millennia, it becomes possible to reconnect with that older way of seeing, to understand our place not just in relation to our immediate surroundings, but in relation to the universe itself.
As dawn approaches, the stars begin to fade. The brightest hold on longest, but eventually even they succumb to the growing light in the eastern sky. The monuments emerge from shadow, their forms becoming visible once more. The night gives way to day, the stars yield to the sun, and the cycle that has repeated since the Earth formed continues once more. In the spaces between the great monuments, in the shadows of the towering cliffs, life persists against all odds. Monument Valley may appear barren at first glance, a landscape dominated by rock and sand, but closer examination reveals a surprising diversity of life, all adapted to survive in this harsh environment. The largest and most impressive mammals of Monument Valley are the desert bighorn sheep. These animals, superbly adapted to life in rugged terrain, navigate the steep faces of the monuments with seemingly impossible ease. They leap from ledge to ledge, climb nearly vertical cliffs, and traverse slopes of loose talus where a human would struggle to maintain footing. Bighorn sheep were once common throughout the American West, but hunting and disease reduced their numbers drastically. Conservation efforts have helped restore populations in many areas, including Monument Valley, where a small but healthy population persists. The sheep are most often seen in the early morning or evening, grazing on the sparse vegetation that grows on the monument's lower slopes and around the valley floor. The rams, distinguished by their massive curved horns, can weigh up to 300 pounds. These horns are not shed annually like deer antlers, but grow continuously throughout the animal's life, sometimes reaching a full curl that spirals back around toward the face. During the autumn rut, rams engage in spectacular battles, charging at each other and crashing their horns together with impacts that can be heard echoing across the valley. Ewes and young sheep form small herds, moving across the landscape in search of food and water. Water is a critical resource for bighorn sheep, and they must drink regularly, especially during the hot summer months. The springs that seep from the bases of the monuments are crucial to their survival, providing reliable water sources in an otherwise dry landscape. Predators of bighorn sheep in Monument Valley are few. Mountain lions occasionally pass through the area and will take sheep if the opportunity presents itself, but lion populations are low and encounters are rare. The sheep's primary defense is their agility and their ability to escape onto terrain where few predators can follow. More common than bighorn sheep, though less often seen, are coyotes. These adaptable canines thrive in desert environments, adjusting their behavior and diet to match available resources. In Monument Valley, coyotes hunt rodents, rabbits, and ground-nesting birds. They scavenge when opportunities arise. They eat plants, fruits, and insects when meat is scarce. Coyotes are primarily nocturnal in Monument Valley, avoiding the heat of the day and the attention of humans. Their vocalizations are more often detected by their calls, the high-pitched yips and howls that echo across the desert at night, than actual sightings. These vocalizations serve multiple purposes: maintaining territory, communicating with pack members, and perhaps simply expressing the joy of being alive under the desert stars. Foxes, both kit foxes and gray foxes, also inhabit Monument Valley, though they are rarely seen. These small canines are even more nocturnal than coyotes and extremely wary of humans. They den in burrows, often taking over those dug by other animals, and hunt at night for rodents, insects, and small birds. Rabbits are common prey for the valley's predators. Both desert cottontails and black-tailed jackrabbits live in Monument Valley, though they employ different survival strategies. Cottontails are small and relatively sedentary, relying on cover and their cryptic coloration for protection. Jackrabbits are larger and built for speed, with long legs and enormous ears. When threatened, a jackrabbit can sprint at speeds up to 40 miles per hour, zigzagging to avoid predators. The jackrabbit's oversized ears are not just for hearing, but also for thermoregulation. The ears are filled with blood vessels that release heat, helping the animals stay cool in the intense desert heat. On hot days, jackrabbits can sometimes be seen resting in sparse shade, their ears held erect to maximize heat dissipation. Rodents, though small and often nocturnal, play crucial roles in the Monument Valley ecosystem. Kangaroo rats, named for their large hind legs and hopping locomotion, are remarkably adapted to desert life. They can survive indefinitely without drinking water, extracting all the moisture they need from the seeds they eat. They are active at night, hopping across the sand on their powerful hind legs, gathering seeds to store in underground burrows. Pocket mice, deer mice, and various species of ground squirrels also inhabit the valley. These rodents are food for predators, but are themselves important consumers of seeds and plants. They inadvertently plant many seeds by burying caches and forgetting them, contributing to plant reproduction and distribution. Birds are perhaps the most visible wildlife in Monument Valley, though many species are migratory and present only during certain seasons. Ravens are year-round residents and among the most intelligent of Monument Valley's inhabitants. These large black birds can often be seen soaring around the monuments, using thermals to gain altitude without expending energy. They are opportunistic feeders, eating everything from carrion to insects to the eggs and young of other birds. Ravens have a long association with human cultures worldwide, often appearing in mythology and folklore. In Navajo tradition, ravens and crows have significance in various stories and ceremonies. In Monument Valley, ravens seem to study human visitors with intelligent, appraising eyes, perhaps evaluating whether we might provide food or represent a threat. Golden eagles, though less common than ravens, occasionally grace the skies over Monument Valley. These magnificent raptors, with wingspans reaching 7 feet, hunt rabbits and rodents, swooping down from great heights to strike prey with their powerful talons. Eagles nest on cliff ledges, often using the same nest site year after year, adding material each season until the nest becomes a massive structure of sticks and branches. Other raptors present in Monument Valley include red-tailed hawks, which circle overhead calling their distinctive cries, and various smaller hawks and falcons. At night, owls hunt, their silent flight and acute hearing making them formidable predators of nocturnal rodents. Smaller birds are numerous, especially during migration periods, when Monument Valley serves as a rest stop for species moving between summer and winter ranges. Sparrows, finches, and warblers can be found around the sparse vegetation and near water sources. Swallows nest in the alcoves and overhangs of the monuments, constructing mud nests on protected ledges. Vultures, both turkey vultures and the rarer California condors that have been reintroduced to the region, can sometimes be seen circling on thermals, their excellent vision scanning the landscape for carrion. Vultures play an ecological role, cleaning up dead animals and preventing the spread of disease. Reptiles are well represented in Monument Valley, with numerous species of lizards particularly common. Collared lizards, with their distinctive neck markings and ability to run on their hind legs when frightened, are often seen basking on rocks. Side-blotched lizards, smaller and more secretive, are actually more numerous but less conspicuous. Whiptail lizards race across open ground with remarkable speed. At night, geckos emerge from hiding places to hunt insects. These small lizards have specialized toe pads that allow them to climb vertical rock faces and even traverse overhangs. Their chirping vocalizations, unusual for lizards, can sometimes be heard around rock outcrops after dark. Snakes, though less common and rarely seen, are present in Monument Valley. Rattlesnakes, including the western diamondback and the prairie rattlesnake, are the species most feared by visitors, but encounters are actually rare. Rattlesnakes are generally shy and will avoid humans if given the opportunity.
They hunt rodents and lizards, using their heat-sensing pits to detect warm-blooded prey in darkness. Non-venomous snakes include various species of gopher snakes, which are constrictors that also feed on rodents. These snakes are sometimes mistaken for rattlesnakes due to their similar coloring and their defensive behavior of vibrating their tails in leaf litter, creating a buzzing sound reminiscent of a rattlesnake's warning. Insects and other arthropods are diverse and numerous, though often overlooked by visitors focused on the dramatic landscape. Ants are everywhere, with numerous species occupying different niches. Harvester ants gather seeds, creating cleared areas around their nest entrances. Other ant species are predators or scavengers. All are important food sources for horned lizards, which specialize in eating ants. Beetles of many species scurry across the sand or hide beneath rocks. Darkling beetles, which cannot fly, lumber along on the desert floor, their hard exoskeletons protecting them from predators. Scarab beetles, including dung beetles, play important roles in nutrient cycling. Scorpions are present in Monument Valley, emerging at night to hunt insects and other small prey. Several species occur in the area, all equipped with venomous stingers used primarily for subduing prey, though they will sting in self-defense if threatened. Under ultraviolet light, scorpions fluoresce with an eerie green glow, making them easy to spot at night with a UV flashlight. Spiders are numerous and diverse. Tarantulas, large and intimidating in appearance but generally harmless to humans, can sometimes be seen walking across roads at dusk, especially in late summer when males are searching for mates. Smaller spiders construct webs in vegetation or hunt without webs, pouncing on prey. The interrelationships between all these species, predators and prey, pollinators and plants, competitors and cooperators, create an ecosystem that, while sparse compared to lusher environments, is nonetheless complex and balanced. Each species has its role, each fills a niche, and each contributes to the overall functioning of the desert community. The wildlife of Monument Valley reminds visitors that even in this seemingly harsh environment, life finds a way. The adaptations these animals display, the kangaroo rat's water conservation, the bighorn sheep's climbing ability, the rattlesnake's heat-sensing pits, the raven's intelligence, represent millions of years of evolution, of natural selection refining form and function to match environment. To encounter these animals in their native habitat, to watch a golden eagle soar over the monuments, or to spot a bighorn sheep navigating an impossible cliff face, is to witness life in its most elemental form, not pampered or protected, but raw and real, surviving through adaptation and resilience in a land that offers little margin for error.
In the 1930s, when director John Ford first saw Monument Valley, he recognized immediately that he had found something extraordinary. The dramatic monuments, the vast open spaces, the quality of light, all combined to create a landscape that was both beautiful and cinematic. A natural stage set that could amplify and enhance any story filmed there. Ford's 1939 film Stagecoach, starring a young John Wayne in his breakthrough role, was the first major Hollywood production to use Monument Valley as a location. The film's stunning visuals helped establish Ford's reputation as a master director and launched Wayne towards superstardom. But perhaps more significantly, the film introduced Monument Valley to global audiences, making the landscape synonymous with the American West. The opening scene of Stagecoach, showing the stagecoach as a small moving speck against the massive monuments, established a visual language that would be repeated in dozens of subsequent films. The scale comparison, tiny humans and their vehicles dwarfed by the enormous stone formations, emphasized the themes central to the Western genre: the individual against nature, the human struggle against an indifferent universe, the courage required to survive in a harsh land. Ford returns to Monument Valley again and again throughout his career, filming several of his most celebrated westerns there.
My Darling Clementine, 1946, Fort Apache, 1948, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, 1949, The Searchers, 1956, and Cheyenne Autumn, 1964, all feature the iconic landscape. Each film used the valley differently, but all benefited from its visual power. The Searchers, often cited as one of the greatest American films ever made, makes particularly effective use of Monument Valley's landscape. The film's most famous shot, the final image of John Wayne's character framed in a doorway with Monument Valley visible beyond, has been endlessly analyzed and referenced. The doorway creates a literal and metaphorical frame, positioning the wilderness of Monument Valley as both destination and exile, home and hostile territory. Ford developed a close relationship with the Navajo people living in and around Monument Valley. Many Navajo appeared in extras in his films, and some, like the Cly family, worked with Ford on multiple productions. Harry Goulding, who operated a trading post on the edge of Monument Valley, served as liaison between the film crews and the Navajo community, helping to negotiate access and employment. The money that flowed into Monument Valley from film production provided significant economic benefits to the Navajo families living there. Work as extras or laborers on film sets offered income in a region where economic opportunities were limited. Some Navajo individuals became recognized for their contributions to specific films, though they rarely received screen credit or financial rewards proportional to their work. However, the relationship between Hollywood and the Navajo was not without complications. The films shot in Monument Valley, while visually stunning, often portrayed Native Americans in stereotypical or demeaning ways. Navajo actors were frequently cast as generic Indians, regardless of tribal affiliation. The stories told were almost always from a white perspective, with Native characters serving as obstacles or victims rather than as complex human beings with their own motivations and perspectives. Ford's later film, Cheyenne Autumn, represented an attempt to tell a Native American story with more sympathy and complexity, but even this film, shot partially in Monument Valley, fell short of authentic representation. The Navajo extras were once again playing members of a different tribe, and the film's perspective remained fundamentally that of an outsider looking in. Beyond Ford's work, numerous other filmmakers were drawn to Monument Valley. The landscape appeared in westerns, certainly, but also in road movies, science fiction films, commercials, and music videos. Each new appearance reinforced Monument Valley's status as an icon, but also risked reducing it to a cliché, a visual shorthand for the West that obscured its specific character and significance. Photographers, too, flocked to Monument Valley. Alan Adams, the master of American landscape photography, created several iconic images of the valley, including the famous photograph of the Totem Pole. Adams' approach emphasized the formal beauty of the landscape, the play of light and shadow, the monumental quality of the stone. His images, made with large format cameras and printed with exquisite attention to tonal range, presented Monument Valley as almost abstract, a study in form and light rather than a specific place with specific cultural and historical significance. Other photographers brought different perspectives. Some focused on the Navajo people living in the valley, documenting their daily lives and traditional practices. Others sought to capture the changing light, returning again and again to photograph the monuments under different conditions. Still others approached Monument Valley as a challenge, attempting to create images that stood apart from the thousands of photographs already made there. Painters from the early 20th century to the present have also been drawn to Monument Valley. The landscape offers both challenges and opportunities for painters. The challenge of representing such monumental forms convincingly, the opportunity to use color and composition in ways that photography cannot match. Some painters worked in a realist style, attempting to capture the landscape's appearance faithfully. Others took a more expressive approach, using exaggerated colors or simplified forms to convey the emotional impact of the place. The cumulative effect of all this artistic attention has made Monument Valley one of the most recognizable landscapes on Earth.
People who have never been to Arizona, who may never travel to the American Southwest, nonetheless recognize the distinctive silhouettes of the Mittens and other formations. Monument Valley has become not just a place, but an idea, a symbol that carries meanings beyond its physical and geographical reality. This iconic status is a blessing and a curse for Monument Valley. The attention brings economic benefits. Tourism is a significant source of income for the Navajo Nation and for the families living in and around the valley. The fees charged for park admission, for guided tours, for camping and photography permits all contribute to the local economy. But the attention also brings challenges. Heavy visitation can damage the landscape through erosion, litter, and general wear. Popular viewpoints show signs of overuse. Visitors sometimes behave disrespectfully, venturing into closed areas, disturbing wildlife, or treating Navajo residents as part of the scenery rather than as people with rights and privacy. The challenge for the future is managing Monument Valley in a way that preserves both its natural beauty and its cultural significance, while allowing sustainable levels of visitation and economic activity. This requires careful planning, effective regulation, and a recognition that Monument Valley belongs first and foremost to the Navajo people, who have the right to determine how it is used and protected. The fact that Monument Valley has appeared in so many films and photographs has created a kind of layering, where the physical landscape becomes overlaid with cultural associations and memories. When visitors arrive at Monument Valley for the first time, they often experience a sense of recognition. They have seen this place before, in movies, in photographs, in advertisements. The real landscape must compete with or confirm these pre-existing images, and the experience of actually being there becomes entangled with the experience of having seen representations of the place.
This phenomenon is not unique to Monument Valley, but it is perhaps more pronounced there than in many other locations because the valley's appearance is so distinctive and because it has been reproduced so extensively. The challenge for photographers and filmmakers now is to find ways to see and represent Monument Valley freshly, to look past the familiar images and discover something new, or at least to acknowledge the weight of representation and work with it consciously rather than unconsciously. Some contemporary artists and filmmakers are attempting to do exactly this, creating work that is self-aware about Monument Valley's iconic status, that interrogates what it means to photograph or film a place that has been photographed and filmed so many times. Others are working to shift the perspective, to tell stories about Monument Valley from Navajo points of view, to represent the landscape not as an exotic backdrop, but as home, as sacred space, as a living environment with contemporary relevance. These efforts represent an important evolution in how Monument Valley is represented in art and media. Rather than simply recycling the same images and tropes established by John Ford and Ansel Adams, contemporary creators are finding new ways to engage with the landscape, ways that acknowledge its complexity and its ongoing significance to the people who live there. Long before John Ford brought his cameras to Monument Valley, long before the Navajo returned from Bosque Redondo, long even before the Navajo first arrived in the Southwest, people lived in and around Monument Valley, leaving traces of their presence that can still be found today. The ancestral Puebloan people, sometimes called Anasazi, though this term is considered disrespectful by many native people as it comes from a Navajo word meaning ancient enemies, inhabited the Four Corners region for over 1,000 years. They built impressive cliff dwellings and pueblo structures, developed sophisticated agricultural techniques, and created art and ceramics that reveal a complex and vital culture. In Monument Valley itself, evidence of ancestral Puebloan occupation is scattered but significant. Ruins of small structures can be found in alcoves and on ledges, tucked into protected spots on the monument faces. These structures were typically small, 1 or 2 rooms, suggesting they were used as storage areas or temporary shelters rather than permanent residences. The main villages were located elsewhere in areas with more reliable water and better agricultural land, but Monument Valley's resources, game animals, useful plants, materials for tools, drew people to visit and use the landscape.
Petroglyphs and pictographs, rock art created by pecking through the desert varnish or by painting on rock surfaces, can be found in various locations around Monument Valley. These images include geometric designs, animal figures, handprints, and anthropomorphic figures. Some may have religious or ceremonial significance. Others might be territorial markers or simply artistic expressions. Interpreting rock art is challenging because we cannot know with certainty what the creators intended. The images are separated from us by centuries and by vast cultural differences. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence can suggest possible meanings, but definitive interpretation is usually impossible. What we can say is that the people who created these images considered them important enough to spend significant time and effort on them, that they chose specific locations deliberately, and that the images connect us across time to people who also experienced Monument Valley's beauty and power. In addition to structures and rock art, ancestral Puebloan people left behind more humble traces. Potsherds scattered on the surface where vessels broke and were discarded, stone tools dropped or lost, fire-cracked rocks from hearths, and middens, trash heaps that to archaeologists are valuable sources of information about diet, technology, and daily life. The ancestral Puebloans living in the Monument Valley area cultivated corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that formed the agricultural foundation of many southwestern cultures. They supplemented agriculture with hunting and gathering, taking deer, rabbits, and other game, collecting piñon nuts, yucca fruit, and other wild plant foods. They wove baskets and sandals from yucca and other plant fibers. They made pottery for cooking and storage. They created jewelry and ornaments from shells traded from the Pacific coast and the Gulf of California, evidence of far-ranging trade networks. Around 1300 CE, for reasons that are still debated by archaeologists, the ancestral Puebloan people began to leave the Four Corners region. Theories for this abandonment include prolonged drought, resource depletion, social conflict, or religious or cultural changes. Whatever the reasons, by 1400 the Great Pueblos were empty and the people had migrated to other areas, primarily to the south and east, where their descendants still live in the Pueblos and New Mexico and Arizona. The ancestral Puebloans were not the first people in Monument Valley. Evidence of much older occupation exists as well, though it is harder to find and interpret. And Cake people, hunter-gatherers who predated the development of agriculture in the Southwest, left stone tools and hunting sites that date back thousands of years. Paleo-Indian people, the first humans to arrive in the Americas at the end of the last ice age, may have passed through the region, though direct evidence is sparse. These ancient people experienced a very different Monument Valley. During the Ice Age and the millennia immediately following, the climate was wetter and cooler. The valley floor may have been covered with grasslands rather than desert vegetation. Large animals that are now extinct, mammoths, ground sloths, and camels, roamed the landscape. The monuments themselves were younger, less eroded, though still impressive. The transition from Ice Age to modern climate occurred gradually over thousands of years, and human populations had to adapt to changing conditions. As the climate dried and large game animals disappeared, people shifted increasingly to smaller game and plant foods. Eventually, the adoption of agriculture from Mexico provided a new subsistence base, leading to the ancestral Puebloan way of life. For contemporary archaeology, Monument Valley and the surrounding region pose particular challenges and opportunities. The dry climate preserves organic materials that would decay quickly in wetter environments. Textiles, wood, plant remains, materials that provide crucial information about past ways of life, survive in caves and rock shelters. At the same time, the landscape is vast and access is limited, making comprehensive surveys difficult. Moreover, archaeological work in Monument Valley must be conducted with sensitivity to Navajo concerns and sovereignty. The Navajo Nation has its own regulations governing archaeological research on tribal lands, and these regulations reflect Navajo cultural values regarding ancestors and sacred sites. Navajo traditional beliefs hold that disturbing the remains of the dead can have spiritual consequences, making excavation of burials particularly sensitive. This has led to conflicts between archaeologists who see excavation as essential for understanding the past and native people who view this disturbance as disrespectful or even dangerous. Increasingly, archaeologists are working to find approaches that respect native concerns while still advancing knowledge. This might involve limiting excavation, consulting with tribal members about research priorities, employing native people in archaeological work, or making research results available to tribal communities in accessible formats. The prehistoric sites in Monument Valley are protected by federal and tribal law. It is illegal to disturb, damage, or remove archaeological materials from public or tribal lands. Unfortunately, looting of archaeological sites has been a persistent problem in the Southwest, driven by collectors willing to pay high prices for ancient pottery and artifacts. Each looted site represents lost knowledge, as the context that gives artifacts their scientific value is destroyed when objects are removed.
Visitors to Monument Valley occasionally encounter archaeological sites, perhaps a scatter of potsherds visible on the surface, or a structure visible in an alcove. The appropriate response is to observe from a distance without disturbing anything. Removing artifacts, even small stone flakes or potsherds, is theft and damages the archaeological record. Walking on fragile sites can cause erosion and damage. The best practice is to look, perhaps photograph, though some sites are protected from photography for cultural reasons, but never touch or disturb. The archaeological record in Monument Valley is a finite, non-renewable resource. Once a site is damaged or destroyed, the information it contained is lost forever. Protecting these sites ensures that future generations will be able to learn from them, that the stories of the people who lived in Monument Valley thousands of years ago will not be erased. For the Navajo people, the archaeological sites in Monument Valley are not just scientific resources, but connections to previous inhabitants of the land. While the ancestral Puebloans were not Navajo ancestors, Navajo tradition acknowledges their presence and their contributions to the landscape. Some Navajo ceremonies and practices incorporate or reference these earlier peoples and their ruins. This layering of history, Paleo-Indian hunters, archaic foragers, ancestral Puebloan farmers, Navajo pastoralists, American settlers, and tourists, creates a palimpsest, each layer partially obscuring but also building on what came before. Monument Valley has witnessed all of human presence in the Southwest, from the first people to cross the Bering Land Bridge to the tourists who arrive today in air-conditioned RVs. Understanding this deep history, recognizing that Monument Valley's story extends far beyond the geological to encompass thousands of years of human experience, enriches our appreciation of the landscape. The monuments are not just scenic wonders, but witnesses to human drama, struggle, creativity, and survival extending back to the edge of memory. The Navajo families who live in Monument Valley today represent a continuation of tradition and an adaptation to contemporary reality. Though their numbers are fewer than in past generations, those who remain maintain connections to the land and to traditional practices, while also navigating the complexities of life in the 21st century. A typical day for a Navajo family living in Monument Valley might begin before dawn, especially during the cooler months. The air is cold, the stars still bright in the western sky. Inside a modern house or a traditional hogan, family members awake and begin their preparations. Coffee is made, breakfast prepared. If there are children, they must be readied for school, which might require a long bus ride to a distant campus. For families that still keep sheep, the morning routine includes checking on the flock. Sheep must be counted, any problems addressed, water ensured. During lambing season, this morning check is especially important, as ewes might have given birth overnight and the newborn lambs need attention. The sheep will be moved from the night pen to grazing areas, a task that might involve walking several miles. Older family members, grandparents, and great-grandparents might speak Navajo as their first language and English as a second language, or not at all. They are the repositories of traditional knowledge, the stories, the ceremonies, the proper ways of doing things. They might spend part of the day at traditional tasks, weaving, silverworking,
gathering plants for medicine or ceremony. Weaving is a particularly important traditional practice among Navajo women. The process begins with the sheep themselves, whose wool is sheared once or twice a year. The raw wool must be cleaned, removing dirt and grease. Then it is carded, the fibers aligned, and spun into yarn using a spindle. Natural dyes might be prepared from plants: yellow from rabbit brush, red from juniper root, black from pinon pitch and sumac. Or commercial dyes might be used for colors that are difficult to achieve naturally. The loom is traditionally vertical, set up outdoors or in a sheltered area. The weaver works from bottom to top, creating patterns that might be traditional designs passed down through generations or contemporary innovations. A single rug can take weeks or months to complete, depending on its size and complexity. The finished product might be kept for family use, sold to traders or galleries, or commissioned by a specific buyer. Weaving is not just an economic activity, but a cultural practice with spiritual significance. Traditional stories tell of Spider Woman who taught the Navajo to weave, and the act of weaving is seen as a sacred practice that connects the weaver to these traditions. Flaws are sometimes deliberately woven into rugs, a spirit line that allows the weaver's creativity to flow out rather than being trapped in the finished work. Silverwork is traditionally a male practice, though this is not an absolute rule. Navajo silversmiths create jewelry, rings, bracelets, belt buckles, necklaces, using techniques that were originally learned from Mexican smiths in the 19th century, but that have become distinctly Navajo in style. Turquoise, the blue-green stone that occurs in deposits across the Southwest, is a favored material, set in silver to create pieces that are both beautiful and culturally significant. Contemporary Navajo families in Monument Valley must balance these traditional practices with modern economic realities. Tourism provides income for some families through guiding tours, selling crafts, or appearing in photographs for which they expect and deserve payment. Others find work in nearby towns, commuting sometimes substantial distances for employment. Some families have members who have moved away for education or jobs, but who return regularly for ceremonies and family events. Education represents both opportunity and challenge. Schools can provide knowledge and skills that lead to economic opportunities, but they can also be sites where Navajo language and culture are marginalized or lost. Many Navajo families struggle with the tension between wanting their children to succeed in the broader American economy and wanting them to maintain Navajo identity and practices. The Navajo language itself is at a critical juncture. Older generations speak it fluently, but middle generations may have limited proficiency, and younger generations often speak primarily English. Language preservation efforts, including immersion schools and language classes, attempt to reverse this trend, but the dominance of English in education, media, and economic life makes maintaining Navajo fluency challenging. Ceremonies remain central to Navajo cultural life, though their practice has evolved over time. Traditional ceremonies, healing ceremonies, blessing ways, protection ceremonies require specialized knowledge held by medicine men or women who have spent years learning the songs, prayers, and ritual procedures. These ceremonies can last days and require the participation of extended family and community members. Some ceremonies require specific locations or materials, connecting them to the landscape. Sand paintings created as part of healing ceremonies use colored sands to create intricate designs that represent holy people and sacred places. These paintings are temporary, they are destroyed at the ceremony's conclusion, but their creation and use is a living connection to ancient practices.
The hogan remains important for ceremonies, even if families live primarily in modern houses. A properly constructed hogan, built with the door facing east, blessed with corn pollen and prayers, provides a sacred space where traditional practices can be conducted. The hogan's circular or octagonal shape is significant, representing the cosmos, with the smoke hole at the center corresponding to the opening through which the Navajo emerged into this world.
Modern life in Monument Valley also includes contemporary concerns: access to healthcare, quality of schools, maintenance of infrastructure, economic development. The tribal government, based in Window Rock, Arizona, works on these issues, but Monument Valley's remote location and relatively small population mean that services and resources can be limited. Water remains a critical issue. The springs that emerge at the base of the monuments provide some water, but modern needs for homes, for livestock, for visitors exceed what these sources can provide sustainably. Wells have been drilled, sometimes to great depths, to access groundwater. Water conservation is necessary, and families are conscious of using water carefully. Electricity has reached some areas of Monument Valley, but others remain off-grid, relying on generators or solar panels. Internet access is limited or non-existent in many areas, creating a digital divide between Navajo residents and the broader society. This affects everything from education, as students increasingly need internet access for schoolwork, to economic opportunities, as more jobs and services move online. Transportation is essential in this landscape of vast distances. Families might drive 50 miles or more for groceries, or 100 miles for specialized services. Vehicles must be reliable, and the dirt roads that connect many homes to paved highways can be challenging, especially during wet weather when they become muddy, or after rare snows when they might be impassable. Despite these challenges, many Navajo families express deep attachment to Monument Valley and to the traditional homeland. The connection to place, to the land where ancestors lived and are buried, to the sacred mountains visible on the horizon, provides a sense of identity and belonging that cannot be quantified economically. For many Navajo people, Monument Valley is not simply where they live, but who they are. The younger generation faces particular pressures and opportunities. They must decide whether to stay in Monument Valley, accepting limited economic opportunities but maintaining close connection to land and culture, or to leave for education and employment elsewhere, accepting distance from family and homeland but gaining access to broader opportunities. Neither choice is without cost, and many young people struggle with this decision. Some find ways to bridge these options, perhaps leaving for education but returning to work in tribal government or education, or maintaining a home in Monument Valley while working elsewhere part of the year. Technology, despite limited access, offers some possibilities for remote work that might allow people to earn livings while remaining physically present in the valley. The future of Navajo life in Monument Valley will depend on many factors: economic opportunities, climate change and water availability, educational systems, cultural preservation efforts, and the choices made by individual families and by the tribal government. But if history is any guide, the Navajo people will continue to adapt while maintaining core cultural identity, just as they have through all the changes and challenges of the past centuries. The sheep will continue to graze on the sparse grass, the weavers will continue to create beautiful textiles, the ceremonies will continue to be performed, and the Navajo people will continue to call Monument Valley home, living in relationship with a landscape that is both beautiful and harsh, both nurturing and demanding, both ancient and eternally new. Among all the viewpoints in Monument Valley, few are as iconic as John Ford's Point, a rocky promontory that extends out over a sweep of the valley, offering a panoramic view that has been photographed millions of times and has appeared in countless films and advertisements. The viewpoint is named, of course, for director John Ford, who used it as a filming location in several of his westerns. The spot offers a commanding view of the valley, with multiple monuments visible in different directions, creating a composition that filmmakers and photographers find irresistible. A lone juniper tree, twisted by wind and age, stands near the edge of the promontory, often included in photographs as a foreground element that adds scale and visual interest.
What makes John Ford's Point so cinematically effective is its combination of elevation and perspective. The viewpoint is high enough to provide a sense of the valley's expanse, but not so high as to make the monuments seem small or distant. The various formations, the Mittens, Mitten Buttes, the Totem Pole, and others, are arrayed across the field of view in a way that creates depth and layers, drawing the eye into the distance. Many Navajo families have set up small vendor areas at John Ford's Point, selling jewelry, weavings, and other crafts to tourists. They also offer the opportunity for visitors to photograph them, sometimes on horseback in traditional dress, posed against the spectacular backdrop. This represents both economic opportunity and cultural commodification. Navajo people making a living by performing Indianness for tourists, a complicated transaction that involves real cultural elements, but also elements of performance and commercialization. The views from John Ford's Point change dramatically throughout the day. Early morning brings side lighting from the east, throwing the monuments into high relief, creating deep shadows and emphasizing their three-dimensionality. Midday flattens the scene somewhat, though the sheer scale and beauty of the landscape remain impressive. Late afternoon, when the sun comes from the west, creates the most photographed lighting conditions, with the monuments glowing in warm light against a darkening sky. Photographers often arrive hours before sunset, claiming prime positions, setting up tripods, and waiting for the light to reach its peak. The sunset itself, when the sun drops below the horizon and the last light rakes across the monuments, can be spectacular, with the red stone seeming to glow from within. The minutes after sunset, during the blue hour, offer a different kind of beauty, the monuments silhouetted against a sky that transitions from orange and pink to deep blue and purple. From John Ford's Point, the vastness of the valley becomes palpable. The monuments, impressive as they are, seem to float in a sea of space. The distance between them becomes apparent, the miles of empty desert floor between each formation. The horizon stretches away in all directions, broken only by distant monuments, and on clear days by mountain ranges far beyond the valley itself. This sense of space, of openness, of unrestricted distance is part of what draws people to Monument Valley and to the American West in general. In an increasingly crowded world where open space is at a premium and where human presence is ubiquitous, Monument Valley offers something rare, a landscape where one can see for miles without encountering obvious signs of human development, where the view is not interrupted by power lines or buildings or roads.
Of course, this is somewhat illusory. Monument Valley is not wilderness in the formal sense. People live here. Roads cross the valley, power lines run to some areas, guided tours bring visitors to locations throughout the valley. But compared to most places, Monument Valley retains a sense of openness and space that feels increasingly precious. The horizon, that line where Earth meets sky, takes on particular significance when viewed from John Ford's Point. In flat terrain, the horizon is a simple, straight line. But in Monument Valley, the horizon is interrupted by the monuments themselves, by the irregular skyline they create. The negative space between the monuments becomes as important as the monuments themselves, the gaps and openings through which distant landscape can be glimpsed, the framing that one monument provides for another. Photographers and artists have long been fascinated by horizons, by the way they divide the visual field, by their associations with distance and possibility and the unknown. In Monument Valley, the horizon is not a barrier, but an invitation, suggesting that beyond what is visible lies more landscape equally vast and beautiful, that the journey could continue indefinitely, that there is always more to see. This quality of endlessness, of space that extends beyond the limits of vision, contributes to Monument Valley's psychological impact on visitors. Standing at John Ford's Point, looking out over the monuments and the valleys between them, it becomes possible to imagine continuation, extension, infinity.
The mind extends the landscape beyond what the eye can see, creating a sense of limitlessness that can be both exhilarating and unsettling. For some visitors, this vastness is overwhelming. The scale is too large, the emptiness too pronounced. They feel exposed, vulnerable, anxious to return to more enclosed and familiar environments. For others, the openness is liberating, a relief from the confinement of cities and ordinary life, an opportunity to breathe deeply and see far, to feel small in a way that is humbling rather than diminishing. The Navajo perspective on this landscape is, of course, different from that of visitors. For Navajo people, Monument Valley is not a scenic attraction, but home, not an unusual landscape, but the familiar terrain of daily life. The monuments are not exotic wonders, but neighbors, known intimately, imbued with personal and cultural meaning. Yet even for Navajo people, the view from high points like John Ford's Point can be affecting. To see one's homeland laid out in such panoramic splendor, to be reminded of its beauty and its scale, can reinforce the connection to place and the sense of belonging. The horizon in this context is not a limit, but a definition, the boundary of the land that is home, the visible edge of the sacred geography that structures Navajo identity. At John Ford's Point, visitors often experience a moment of contemplation, of pause, of simply looking. The view invites a kind of meditation, a quieting of the constant mental chatter that characterizes much of modern life. There is something about vast landscapes that encourages this state. Perhaps the mind, confronted with more space than it can easily process, simply quiets and observes. These moments of contemplation, however brief, may be among the most valuable experiences that Monument Valley offers. In a culture that increasingly privileges speed, efficiency, productivity, and constant stimulation, the opportunity to simply stand and look, to let beauty wash over consciousness without needing to do anything about it, is rare and valuable. The photographs taken from John Ford's Point, countless millions of them, attempt to capture and preserve these moments. But photographs, no matter how beautiful, cannot fully convey the experience of being there. The quality of the air, the silence broken only by wind, the sense of space and distance, the emotional resonance of confronting something so much larger and older than oneself. Still, people try, and the attempt itself has meaning. To photograph Monument Valley from John Ford's Point is to participate in a tradition, to add one's own vision to the accumulated visual history of the place. Some photographers seek to recreate classic compositions, finding satisfaction in placing their tripods where Ansel Adams might have placed his view camera. Others seek fresh perspectives, new angles, different light, attempting to see and show Monument Valley in ways that have not been done before. And when the light fails and the last photographs are taken, when the sunset has faded and the stars begin to appear, John Ford's Point empties of visitors. The Navajo Enders pack up their crafts and drive home. The tour buses and RVs depart. The viewpoint returns to silence, to darkness, to the wind and the stars. The monuments remain as they always have. The horizon, invisible now in darkness, still divides earth from sky, and the eternal processes of erosion, of wind and water slowly transforming stone, continue their patient work, grain by grain, year by year, shaping the landscape that tomorrow's visitors will see. The summer monsoon season in Monument Valley brings some of the year's most dramatic weather, transforming the normally dry landscape into a stage for displays of atmospheric power and beauty that rival even the monuments themselves. The build-up to a monsoon storm follows a predictable pattern. The morning might be clear, the sky a deep, cloudless blue, but as the day warms and the sun heats the desert floor, columns of warm air begin to rise. These thermals, invisible currents of rising air, carry moisture upward. Where the moisture encounters cooler air at higher altitudes, it begins to condense, forming clouds. By late morning or early afternoon, small cumulus clouds appear,
cotton ball puffs scattered across the sky. These clouds continue to grow throughout the afternoon, fed by the rising thermals. As they grow, they merge with neighboring clouds, forming larger and larger cloud masses. The tops of these clouds begin to tower upward, building into the classic anvil shape of cumulonimbus thunderstorms. The clouds are brilliant white where the sun strikes them, their tops sometimes reaching 50,000 feet into the atmosphere, into regions where the temperature is far below freezing. Within these towering clouds, powerful updrafts and downdrafts create turbulence. Water droplets are carried upward, freeze into ice crystals, collide with other droplets, grow larger and heavier. The constant motion within the cloud creates electrical charge separation, with positive charges accumulating at the top of the cloud and negative charges at the bottom. As the charge separation increases, the voltage between the cloud and the ground below can reach millions of volts. Eventually, this voltage overcomes the insulating properties of the air, and a lightning bolt flashes, creating a conducting path from cloud to ground. The air along this path is heated to temperatures exceeding 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, several times hotter than the surface of the sun. This superheated air explodes explosively, creating the shock wave we hear as thunder.
Lightning strikes the tallest objects in the landscape, trees, isolated rocks, and especially the monument spires. The Totem Pole, standing alone and rising hundreds of feet above the surrounding terrain, is a frequent target for lightning. Each strike may score the rock, blasting away small pieces, sometimes leaving visible marks that will remain for years. The thunder from these strikes, especially when they occur close by, is immediate and overwhelming, a sharp crack followed by rolling booms that echo from the stone walls of the monuments. More distant strikes create delayed thunder that rumbles across the valley, sometimes seeming to come from all directions at once as it reflects from multiple surfaces. And then the rain comes. Monsoon rains are not gentle showers, but intense downpours, releasing sometimes an inch or more of moisture in an hour. The rain falls in sheets, driven by powerful downdrafts from the storm. Visibility drops to near zero. The temperature, which moments before might have been in the high 90s or low 100s, plummets as cool, rain-laden air rushes downward from the storm. The dry desert floor cannot absorb this much moisture so quickly. Water begins to pool and flow, gathering in low spots, running across the surface. The normally bone-dry washes begin to fill with water. First a trickle, then a stream, then a roaring torrent. Flash floods develop with frightening speed, walls of water and debris rushing down channels that were completely dry minutes before. These floods carry tremendous power. They move boulders, undercut banks, reshape the landscape. Anything in their path, vegetation, rocks, unwary animals, is swept along. The water is muddy, laden with sediment eroded from the watershed above. The sound is a roar, audible from a distance, a warning to stay clear of the washes and low-lying areas. But as quickly as the storms build, they often dissipate. The rain might last only 30 minutes or an hour before moving on. The clouds begin to break up, revealing patches of blue sky. The sun emerges, and suddenly the landscape is illuminated by golden light filtered through the retreating storm. Rainbows appear, sometimes double rainbows, arcing across the valley with the dark storm clouds as backdrop and the sunlit monuments in the foreground. The air after a monsoon storm is transformed. The dust that normally hangs in the atmosphere has been washed away. The air is clean, almost startlingly clear. Visibility extends for miles, and distant features that were hazy before the storm now appear sharp and defined. The temperature is cooler, the humidity higher, creating conditions that feel almost tropical compared to the usual desert aridity. The landscape itself shows the effects of the rain. The sand is darkened by moisture. Puddles reflect the sky.
The sparse vegetation seems greener, more vibrant. Within hours or days, plants respond to the moisture, putting out new growth, blooming if conditions are right. The desert, which seemed dead or dormant, reveals its latent vitality. The washes, which ran with violent floods during the storm, begin to dry out almost immediately. The water soaks into the sandy beds or continues flowing downstream. Within a day or two, most washes are dry again, though the rearranged sediment and debris left behind provide evidence of the water's passage. For wildlife, monsoon storms create both challenges and opportunities. Animals caught in the open must seek shelter from the wind and rain. But the moisture provides critical resources: standing water to drink, fresh plant growth to eat, cooler temperatures that reduce stress. Many desert animals time their breeding to coincide with the monsoon, ensuring that their young are born when conditions are most favorable. The monsoon season, typically running from July through September, brings most of Monument Valley's annual precipitation. The exact amount varies considerably from year to year. Some years bring generous rains, others are disappointingly dry. Climate patterns like El Niño and La Niña influence monsoon intensity, as do longer-term climate trends. Climate change is already affecting the monsoon patterns in the Southwest. Some models predict that monsoons will become more variable, with some years seeing very intense rainfall and others seeing little or none. Temperature increases are making the region hotter and drier overall, even if individual storms drop more rain. These changes have significant implications for both natural ecosystems and for the people who depend on monsoon rains for water. For visitors to Monument Valley during monsoon season, the storms add an element of drama and uncertainty to the experience. Weather can change rapidly. Sunny skies can give way to threatening storms in less than an hour. Roads can become impassable during and after heavy rains. Yet many visitors consider seeing a monsoon storm over Monument Valley to be a highlight of their trip, a chance to witness the raw power of nature in one of the world's most spectacular settings. Photographing monsoon storms requires both skill and patience. The light changes rapidly as clouds build and dissipate. The dramatic contrasts, dark storm clouds against sunlit monuments, rainbows arcing across the sky, lightning striking spires, create stunning images but are challenging to capture fleeting moments. Photographers must protect their equipment from rain while positioning themselves to capture the fleeting moments when all the elements align. The sound of thunder echoing from the monuments, the smell of rain on desert sand, the sight of lightning illuminating the monuments against a dark sky, these sensory experiences combine to create memories that last long after the storms have passed. For many people, experiencing a monsoon storm in Monument Valley becomes one of those peak life experiences, moments of intensity and beauty that stand out from the ordinary flow of days. The storms also serve as reminders of the forces that created and continue to shape Monument Valley. The erosion that carved the monuments from the plateau works primarily through water. Each storm, each flash flood, each rivulet of rain running down a monument face contributes to the ongoing transformation of the landscape. What we see today is a snapshot in a process that has been continuing for millions of years and will continue for millions more. As the monsoon season ends and autumn approaches, the storms become less frequent. The moisture-laden air from the south gives way to drier air masses. The sky returns to its typical clear blue, and the intense heat of summer begins to moderate. The brief period of abundance that the monsoons bring gives way to the longer dry period that characterizes most of the year in Monument Valley. But while they last, the monsoons transform the desert, bringing drama and vitality, reminding both residents and visitors that this seemingly barren landscape is in fact very much alive, responsive to moisture, capable of rapid transformation when conditions allow.
As the afternoon light begins to shift toward evening, as the sun descends toward the western horizon, Monument Valley enters what photographers call the golden hour. That period when the light is warm and directional, when shadows lengthen and colors intensify, when the landscape seems to glow from within. The change begins subtly. The harsh, neutral light of midday softens. The angle of the sunlight becomes more pronounced, striking the monuments from the side rather than from above. Details that were washed out in the overhead light become visible. The horizontal layering of the sandstone is emphasized. Ledges and overhangs cast deeper shadows. The color temperature of the light shifts toward the warm end of the spectrum, the oranges and reds and golds that the human eye and brain interpret as warm and inviting. These warm tones interact with the natural colors of the sandstone, enhancing the reds and oranges that are already present, creating a feedback loop where the warm light makes the red stone glow, which in turn reflects warm light onto surrounding surfaces. The east Mitten Butte, facing west, catches this light fully. Its entire face is illuminated with golden light that makes the red sandstone appear almost luminous. Every detail of its surface is revealed, every layer, every variation in color, every patch of desert varnish. The monument seems to stand forward from its surroundings, demanding attention, impossible to ignore.
The west mitten, facing east, is beginning to fall into shadow, its face illuminated only by reflected light from the valley floor and from the east mitten. This creates a different quality, softer, more subtle, the colors cooler and more muted. The contrast between the two monuments, one brilliantly lit and one in shadow, creates visual drama and emphasizes their three-dimensional form. As the sun continues to drop, the zone of direct sunlight climbs higher on the monuments. The bases fall into shadow while the tops continue to glow. This creates an effect where the monuments seem to float, their shadowed bases merging with the darkening valley floor, while their summits remain islands of golden light against the deepening blue of the sky. The sky itself begins to show color. The deep blue of afternoon gives way to lighter blues, and then to oranges and pinks near the horizon. If there are clouds, perhaps remnants of afternoon thunderstorms, they catch the light and create spectacular displays, their undersides glowing orange and pink, their tops still white where they reflect the sun that has dropped below the horizon for observers on the ground. This is when Monument Valley is most photographed, when the most visitors gather at the viewpoints, when the most oohs and ahs are heard. The beauty is almost overwhelming. The colors so intense they seem artificial, as if someone has manipulated a photograph to make it more dramatic than reality. But this is reality. This is what happens when clear desert air, iron-rich sandstone, and low-angle sunlight combine. The Navajo people who have lived in Monument Valley for generations have witnessed countless sunsets like this, yet many report that they never lose the capacity to be moved by the beauty. Some traditional Navajo prayers are specifically offered at sunset, acknowledging the day's end and the transition to night, giving thanks for the day that has passed and asking for protection through the night ahead. The actual moment of sunset, when the sun's disk touches the horizon and then sinks below it, happens quickly at Monument Valley's latitude. The sun appears to accelerate as it approaches the horizon, taking only a few minutes to drop from first contact to complete disappearance. But what follows is often more spectacular than the sunset itself. Alpenglow is the term for the pink or reddish light that illuminates mountains, or in this case, monuments, when the sun is below the horizon. The light has to travel through more atmosphere, which scatters the blue wavelengths and allows the reds and oranges to dominate. This reflected light can make the monuments appear pink or mauve, or even purple, colors that are never seen in direct sunlight. The shadows deepen rapidly after sunset. The valley floor, already in shadow, becomes quite dark. The monuments, still catching some light from the sky, stand out dramatically against this darker background. Stars begin to appear in the eastern sky, though the western sky remains bright. This transition period, from sunset through twilight to full darkness, lasts about an hour. The colors in the sky shift continuously. The oranges and pinks give way to deeper reds and purples. The blue of the sky darkens progressively, going from light blue to royal blue to navy to near black. The first stars become the first hundreds of stars, become thousands of stars. For visitors, this hour after sunset can be a time of quiet reflection. The day's activities are done. The heat has dissipated. The air cools quickly, requiring jackets or sweaters. The sense of ending, of closure, is palpable. Some people choose to linger at the viewpoints, reluctant to leave, wanting to extend the experience. Others head back to their accommodations, carrying with them memories of the spectacular light show they have just witnessed. For photographers, the work continues. Long exposures capture the deepening twilight, the monuments becoming silhouettes against the still bright western sky. As darkness deepens, attention shifts to capturing the stars, the Milky Way arcing over the monuments, the convergence of earth and sky. The end of the day at Monument Valley is also a beginning, the beginning of night, of a different kind of beauty, of different experiences. The monuments that were so visually dominant in daylight become presences felt more than seen, dark forms blocking out stars, their bulk palpable even when their details are invisible. And tomorrow, the cycle will repeat. The sun will rise again in the east, the monuments will be illuminated once more. The light will shift from cool to warm to cool again throughout the day. Shadows will lengthen and shorten and lengthen again, and sunset will once again paint the valley in colors that seem impossible, yet which happen reliably, day after day, year after year, age after age. This dependability, this cyclical repetition, is part of Monument Valley's appeal. In a world characterized by change and uncertainty, the monuments stand as reminders of continuity. The same sun that illuminated them yesterday will illuminate them tomorrow. The same processes that shaped them over millions of years continue today. The same beauty that has moved observers for thousands of years continues to move observers today. Time in Monument Valley operates on multiple scales simultaneously, and understanding these different timescales, human time, historical time, geological time, provides perspective on the valley's place in the larger story of the universe. Human time, the scale of individual human experience, is measured in decades. A person might visit Monument Valley once or twice in a lifetime, or if they live nearby, perhaps hundreds of times. The Navajo families who call Monument Valley home measure their connection to the place in generations. Parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who also lived there, who also watched the sun rise and set over the same monuments, who also faced the challenges and celebrated the beauties of life in this landscape. But even extended family histories covering perhaps a century or two are brief in the context of Monument Valley's full story. Historical time, the period covered by written records and oral traditions, extends back perhaps 1,000 years in this region, back to the ancestral Puebloan peoples who left their marks on the landscape, back to the arrival of the Navajo in the southwest, back to the Spanish explorers and missionaries who first brought European presence to the region. Yet even this historical time is insignificant compared to geological time, the vast stretches of years measured in millions and hundreds of millions. The sandstone of the monuments was deposited as sediment beginning about 270 million years ago, long before dinosaurs, long before mammals, long before anything that we would recognize as familiar existed on Earth.
The erosion that carved the monuments from the plateau began perhaps 70 million years ago with the uplift of the Colorado Plateau, though the major carving likely occurred within the last few million years as erosion rates increased. The current forms of the monuments, the specific shapes we see today, are perhaps tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years old, though they are constantly changing, constantly being refined by ongoing erosion. This perspective, this ability to comprehend geological time, is one of the valuable gifts that Monument Valley offers. Standing among the monuments, observing the evidence of their formation and erosion, it becomes possible to grasp, at least intellectually if not emotionally, the immense age of the Earth and the ongoing nature of geological processes. The human mind struggles to comprehend such vast timescales. We can understand that 270 years is longer than 270 years, but truly grasping the difference, understanding viscerally what 270 million years means, is nearly impossible. It's like trying to comprehend the distance to a star. We can manipulate the numbers, but the reality exceeds our intuitive understanding.
Yet the monuments make the attempt. They stand as physical evidence of deep time, of processes operating on scales that reduce human history to insignificance. The layers in the stone, each representing thousands or millions of years of deposition, create a visual timeline that can be read by those with knowledge. The erosion features, the talus slopes, the desert varnish, all tell stories of time and change. From a certain perspective, the monuments are not permanent features, but temporary forms, intermediate stages in the transformation of mountains to sand, to stone to sand again. The cycle operates continuously. Mountains erode into sediment. Sediment is deposited in basins and oceans. Sediment is compressed and cemented into rock. Tectonic forces lift the rock. Erosion carves the rock into new forms, and eventually the rock itself is reduced to sediment that will begin the cycle anew. Monument Valley captures one moment in this eternal cycle. The monuments we see today are neither the beginning nor the end of the story, but simply the current state, the form that happens to exist in our moment of observation. In the future, whether thousands or millions of years, the monuments will be different, perhaps eroded away entirely, replaced by new formations carved from different layers or in different locations. This impermanence might seem sad or diminishing, suggesting that even the most impressive works of nature are temporary and will ultimately disappear. But it can also be seen as liberating, as a reminder that change is the only constant, that nothing, not monuments, not civilizations, not even continents, lasts forever. For the Navajo people, this cyclical view of time resonates with traditional understandings. Navajo cosmology emphasizes cycles, the cycle of seasons, the cycle of life, the cycle of emergence through different worlds. Time is not seen as a linear progression, but as a series of recurring patterns, each cycle containing elements of those that came before, while also being unique. This cyclical view stands in contrast to the Western linear conception of time, where history proceeds in a single direction from past through present to future, where progress is measured along this line. Both perspectives have value, and Monument Valley accommodates both. It is possible to see the monuments as products of a linear geological history, sediment deposited, then lithified, then uplifted, then eroded, while also recognizing the cyclical nature of the processes involved, erosion creating sediment that becomes stone that is eroded again. The experience of being present in Monument Valley, of being conscious in this particular moment of geological time, creates an interesting temporal paradox. Our consciousness, fleeting and temporary, observes and comprehends, to the extent we can, processes that vastly exceed our own lifespans. We are both insignificant, specks of awareness lasting mere decades, and significant, as perhaps the only beings in the universe capable of appreciating Monument Valley's beauty and understanding its geological history.
This combination of insignificance and significance, of being both trivial and important, is part of what makes experiences in Monument Valley so moving for many people. We are reminded of our small place in the universe, but that reminder comes with the recognition that we are capable of comprehension, that our small, temporary consciousness can understand and appreciate things much larger and longer lasting than ourselves. The monuments stand as a bridge between these timescales. They are old enough to evoke geological time, but new enough, in cosmic terms, to exist contemporaneously with human civilization. They have witnessed human history in this region, the coming and going of cultures, the rise and fall of populations, the changes wrought by different peoples who have inhabited the land. And they will continue to stand, though slowly changing, long after current human concerns have been forgotten. This enduring quality, this sense that the monuments provide continuity across time, makes them valuable not just as scenic wonders, but as anchors for human meaning-making. In a world where change happens rapidly, where technologies and societies transform within decades or even years, the monument's relative stability offers reassurance. Not everything changes quickly. Some things endure, at least on timescales relevant to human experience. But they also remind us that even the most enduring things are temporary. Every day, every storm, every freeze-thaw cycle, the monuments are being transformed, grain by grain. The changes are imperceptible on human timescales. We cannot see the monuments shrinking year by year, but they are real and ongoing nonetheless. The Monument Valley of 1,000 years hence will be different from the Monument Valley of today, just as today's valley differs from the valley of 1,000 years past. This combination of stability and change, of enduring presence and ongoing transformation, perfectly captures the paradox of existence itself. We are all both permanent and temporary, both static and dynamic. We endure for our lifespans while constantly changing. Our identities remain consistent while our cells are replaced and our thoughts and feelings shift. Monument Valley, in its stone reality and its symbolic resonance, reflects these fundamental truths back to us. It stands eternal and ephemeral, timeless and time-bound, a frozen moment in an endless transformation. And we, standing before it, are granted a perspective that extends our usual temporal horizons, that connects us to deep time and vast processes, that places our small, temporary consciousness in a context that is simultaneously humbling and enabling. The monuments will outlast us. They outlasted the ancestral Puebloans and the Spanish explorers and the prospectors and settlers. They will outlast the current generation of Navajo families and the tourists who visit by the millions. But we, in our moment of existence, have the privilege of seeing them, of understanding something of their story, of finding in their presence meaning and beauty that transcend the merely geological. This is the ultimate gift that Monument Valley offers, not just scenic beauty, though the beauty is profound, but perspective, understanding, connection to something larger than ourselves, to timescales and processes that put human concerns in context, while also affirming the value of human consciousness and our capacity for appreciation and understanding. As the stars wheel overhead, as the monument stands silent and dark against the night sky, as another day ends and another begins in the eternal cycle, Monument Valley continues its slow transformation. The work of wind and water proceeds grain by grain. The story continues, chapter after chapter, in a book whose complete text will never be read because it is still being written, and because no consciousness will endure long enough to see it through to completion. But we can read the chapters available to us. We can understand the story so far. We can appreciate the beauty and the grandeur and the meaning, and we can recognize our place in the narrative, not as authors or editors, but as readers, as witnesses, as conscious beings granted the extraordinary privilege of experiencing Monument Valley's majesty in this particular moment of deep time. And that, perhaps, is enough. To stand in Monument Valley, to see and understand and appreciate, to feel the connection to earth and time and the processes that shape our world, this is a profound experience, one that enriches human life and reminds us of our place in the larger story of existence. The monuments stand, time passes, the cycles continue, and in the interplay of stone and time, of permanence and change, of human consciousness and geological process, Monument Valley reveals truths about existence that go beyond words, that must be experienced rather than explained, that touch something deep in the human spirit and remind us that we are part of something much larger and much older and much more magnificent than our individual lives.